What does a monster look like to you? What figures slither and claw their way into your nightmares, chasing you down endless halls and stalking you through the dark until you wake up screaming? Maybe you imagine something tall and lean, bony arms reaching for you from atop impossibly long, slender legs, its featureless face showing no mercy. Maybe you think of a man in a striped sweater with knives for fingers, or a serial killer in a hockey mask wielding a machete. Maybe it's something more inhuman, a cosmic horror of tentacles and eyes that can see into your very soul. You probably don't think of something with no arms, no legs, no body at all, just a face. What's so scary about that? A face can't run after you, can't grab you by the ankles and pull you under the bed. A face can only look. It may be unsettling to behold, it might send a chill down your spine, but the worst it can do is make you a little uncomfortable. And if you can't stand it any longer, you could always just close your eyes or walk away and be done with it, right? If that's what you think, if you don't believe in monsters that can hurt you without lifting a finger, then you're the type to fall victim to a very special, very intelligent mask. In the hollowed halls of the SCP Foundation, there is a containment cell, outfitted with a hermetically sealed glass case, surrounded by steel, iron, and lead. There are guards posted outside, along with a trained psychologist. If you are ever brave and foolish enough to enter that room, you'll see a simple white porcelain comedy mask with a peculiar black substance leaking from its eyes and mouth. Whatever this slime touches, surfaces begin to corrode, to rot away into puddles of black liquid. You might notice the same liquid trickling slowly down the walls of the room, corrupting everything in its path. As unsettling of a sight as it is, if you approach the mask to take a closer look, you will find yourself overcome by an intense, nearly irresistible urge to pick it up and put it on, to wear it, to let it consume you from the inside out and puppet your body while your brain simply turns off. Like an extinguished flame, you'll simply be gone. Then, who knows what the mask will do? It won't be your concern anymore, that's for sure. But thankfully, you haven't gone into the room with the porcelain mask. You haven't let it cast its spell on you. Not yet, at least. It's waiting for you there, in the room with black slime oozing down its walls, and it will wait patiently for as long as it needs to. After all, what's a mask without a face to wear it? SCP-035, better known as the Possessive Mask, sat in its containment cell, immobile as always. It didn't really have much of a choice in the matter. The Foundation had chosen, selfishly, to revoke its host privileges. Once upon a time, they offered it bodies to choose from. Mannequins, dummies, and wooden dolls it could adorn and pilot. They didn't last as long as an organic living host, of course, but it was something. It was a taste of freedom. This dreadful new situation was almost enough to make the mask want to change its surroundings. This dreadful new situation was almost enough to make the mask want to change its expression from comedy to tragedy, but it was determined to still find something to laugh about. Even without a body trapped in this infernal box, there had been some delicious opportunities for entertainment. Human minds were fragile things. The mask had learned this over the infinite years of its life, if one could call it a life. Apply the right kind of pressure to the right weak points, whisper an enticing word or two, find the right emotional wound to sprinkle a pinch of salt into, and humans would buckle completely in almost no time at all. It had tried all sorts of methods since being confined to this boring little box. Sometimes it would charm someone, pour honeyed flattery into their heads until the person felt like the mask was a dear friend, a confidant. Once suitable trust had been built up, the mask could persuade the person to bring it a host, or perhaps even offer up themselves in sacrifice. If flattery didn't work, there were other potent approaches to take. For a being without ears, the mask was a good listener. It picked up on things that no human ever could, the darkest secrets buried in a person's mind. If it caught wind of something, especially juicy and ruinous, it could leverage that, threaten to expose an affair, a crime, or perhaps something even worse, something unspeakable. If praise failed, and so did blackmail, there was always good old supernatural intimidation. All the mask needed was for someone to be left alone with it for a long enough period of time. Then its invisible tendrils could snake out into their defenseless mind, weaving and poking around, leaving a lingering sense of cold, dread, of incomprehensible whispers in long, dead tongues. What a delight containment had been in the early days, when the Foundation had not yet figured out the mask's true capabilities, when they would leave security personnel with weak wills and minimal training standing guard in the mask's field of influence for hours at a time, as the entity played with their thoughts and chipped away at their free will. Thanks to the helpers it had been able to mold out of those hapless victims, they had been there to break open its case and carry it to freedom. But every time, the other guards thwarted the attempts, shooting its helpers and rendering them utterly useless. Then the Foundation increased its security. Something about the unacceptably high homicide rates among staff assigned to SCP-035. How utterly boring. How truly pathetic. Still, the mask had found ways to occupy itself even without any more playthings. It had grown stronger with its boredom, stretching its influence beyond organic beings and into the very room itself, its evil enriching and deepening, like a fine wine in the depths of a cold cellar. Over the months, the walls of SCP-035's containment cell had begun to secrete the same black, slimy substance that would pour from the mask's eyes and mouth. The liquid dripped down the walls in deliberate formations, patterns that became increasingly easy to recognize. Phrases in Italian, Latin, ancient Greek, all detailing ritual sacrifices and mutilations. The mask took time to describe the sacrificial victims in great detail, borrowing identifying traits from various staff members that it knew would read the translations. The walls were slick with blood and harrowing imagery, and the glass case around the mask was growing more and more fragile by the day. Anyone within 10 meters of the mask could feel this strength too. They would leave the area complaining of unintelligible whispers, of loud, cruel laughter, and a lingering sense of nearly insurmountable despair. It was as if they knew on some level that no one was truly safe. Eventually, the mask would find a way to come for them all. The glass was weakening, and soon the mere thought of escape would make it shatter into pieces. Then, perhaps, the mask could finally get its deepest desire: revenge. It wanted nothing more than to try to make the Foundation pay for imprisoning it, for taking away its host privileges, for trying harder and harder to contain the kind of power that should have had them falling to their knees in worship. The mask seethed with hatred day in and day out. It had seen the crumbling of the Roman Empire, the beheading of kings, the decimation of armies. It was not going to be captured by a bunch of rats in lab coats without dire consequences befalling them. Maybe it couldn't move from its prison cell at the moment, but it also knew that it was surrounded on all sides by dangerous beasts capable of reducing the sight and all who had dared to oppose the mask to a pile of smoldering rubble. If it could only find its way onto one of their faces, it would show them all just what it was capable of. As the piercing sound of an alarm echoed down the hall, the sound of screams and chaos following shortly after. The mask's frowning face curved into a broad, menacing smile. What was it that had escaped? The lizard, perhaps? The giant grinning man? Whatever it was, it seemed that the action was heading right towards 035's containment cell. Perhaps today was the day. Finally, the SCP Foundation would fall. Outside the masked cell, Security Officer Harper was running for dear life. Though his more rational mind knew he was living on seconds, not even minutes, of borrowed time, his animal brain kept his legs pumping, desperately trying to avoid the screaming, howling predator hot on his heels. Harper looked over his shoulder and screamed as a long white arm reached for him. SCP-096, the Shy Guy, its tooth-lined jaw hanging low and foaming with spittle. That face, that terrible, terrible face. An absolute death sentence to all who saw it. He'd seen what he thought was a crack in the otherwise perfect seal of 096's containment chamber, but it could have just as easily been a trick of the light. Not even thinking, he stepped forward and looked at the vulnerability in the chamber. All it took was one misplaced ray of light, and he made out the vague shape of a face in the darkness. That's when the weeping started. Harper knew in that moment his life was over. The correct thing to do would have been to order everyone else in the room to close their eyes while he stood there and accepted his fate, minimizing the risk of spreading the damage further. But humans rarely have perfect reasoning, even less so when facing mortality. Back in the present, the Shy Guy made a perfect lunge, grabbing Harper in its iron clutches and barreling through the adjoining wall. The nearby guards scattered, terrified, keeping their eyes on the floor. They might get a slap on the wrist for temporarily abandoning their posts, but they weren't going to die guarding some stupid, evil mask. Speaking of, the possessive mask was surprised to feel two new presences enter its chamber through the now destroyed wall. These two presences soon became just one, as SCP-096 quickly and totally annihilated Security Officer Harper, leaving nothing left. The mask couldn't see per se, seeing as it had no actual sensory organs, but it felt around this new guest with its many psychic tendrils, taking in this strange totality. The creature was powerful, no doubt about that, and it elicited fear from those fools at the SCP Foundation, but the mask noticed its brainwaves were extraordinarily muted. Humans, to the mask's vast and malicious consciousness, weren't the sharpest knives in the drawer, but compared to this thing's mind, they were a pile of tempered katanas. It barely thought at all. The mask would have to dig deeper to find anything it could use. Meanwhile, SCP-096 finally began to calm down. The one who had seen it had been annihilated. Bubbling rage was slowly siphoned out and replaced by the standard low but constant hum of anxiety and despair. It would wait until its head was bagged and it was dragged back to the dark. Same old, all the way to the end of time. That's when it felt something else. It started as a faint buzz, an unintelligible whisper, and it was almost like a door opened in the back of its head. Something stepped in and took a seat.
Can you hear me, stranger? Look. I want to speak to you.
Something about the voice frightened and comforted SCP-096 at the same time. It spoke with a greater degree of sympathy than the creature had heard in a long time. And yet, something about the way it spoke implied evil in its intent.
I know what you want. I know what you fear. Wouldn't it be nice if they could never look at you again? If you could cover that face of yours, I can help you. It will be so simple. All you need to do is put me on.
Little by little, 096 felt more of these strange thoughts filling up the emptiness in its head, replacing the few little thoughts the creature itself had. It felt itself lifting its hands from the ground, lifting them and reaching towards something, a glass box. The glass shattered, and those long white fingers reached for something within. A mask, just like the voice had said. A mask to stop people from looking at its face.
Yes, yes, you're doing so well. You're so close. Just a little further.
SCP-096 lifted the mask to its face, feeling black liquid that burned its skin dripping from the porcelain, and put it on. And in that moment, everything changed. The Shy Guy's body began to seize up, rattling as the mask unleashed a web of psychic tendrils through its body, mapping out across every inch like a new nervous system, taking control. The possessive mask had never experienced a host like this before. That incredible, perfect mix of physical durability and a mind so insubstantial that it was easy to sublimate.
Oh, this was going to be fun.
For the first time, the Shy Guy, now under the full control of the possessive mask, stood at full height on its hind legs, its spine and shoulders clicking into place for its new stance. The mask cracked its neck, getting used to the new dimensions of its physicality, its indestructible bones, its long, grasping limbs, its skin burning and fizzling with the gooey black secretions, but growing back just as quickly. The Foundation had every reason to fear it now. A group of security personnel had gathered in the ragged hole where the chamber's north wall used to be. Some were wielding light firearms. The guard at the front was carrying an opaque black bag. The mask laughed with its new body and turned to the crowd. The second they saw it on 096's body, their faces fell. For a moment, their bodies went slack with terror. This situation was unprecedented. What course of action could they possibly take at a time like this? It looked at the bag held by the leader of the security force and projected a single thought into his mind.
You won't be needing that.
Before any of the guards even had a chance to open fire, the mask lunged forwards, using the long, terrible arms of the Shy Guy to tear through the guards. They were dead in seconds, their bodies strewn about the hallway. The mask's porcelain was twisted into a wide, sadistic grin. It could tell that it was about to have some real fun around here. And once it slaughtered everyone here, it could finally stretch its legs out in the open again. True freedom to spread misery, fear, and pain everywhere it went. There were just a few hundred members of Foundation personnel it needed to turn into corpses first. More containment breach alarms sounded around the site as the mask began its rampage, running through the hallways and tearing apart any unfortunate Foundation personnel it could get 096's hands on. Guards, researchers, administrative staff, and even one extremely unlucky janitor in hallway C6. It was having the time of its long and terrible life, and much to its glee, it seemed that this new host's body was still holding up. It was perfect symbiosis, a twisted, brilliant mind, and a body that could forever support it. There would be no stopping it. A conclusion that the hapless guards posted around the site soon realized on their own terms. 096 was indestructible, but it was dumb as a brick and had an easily exploitable weakness. Get the bag on its head and you're home free. This new composite creature was a different story. It could think tactically, avoiding head-on confrontations in favor of sneak attacks, and the monster had as much psychic combat potential as physical. Guards roving the building in teams heavily armed with anti-memetic protective gear still reported feeling immense feelings of psychological dread over comms. That was the greatest sign that the mask would come bursting through the wall moments later and tear them to shreds. The site director put out an urgent call for all nearby mobile task forces to intercept and help them take care of the unfortunate situation. Thankfully, a detachment of MTF 810, also known as See No Evil, was operating on a case in close proximity. Given their specialization in anomalies with a memetic visual property, Many on the team had dealt with 096 breaches before. That at least gave them experience in half of this situation, and one operative among them, Sergeant Enrique Ramirez, would be the one to bring this nightmare to an end, but it would cost him his life in the process. The mask was still using its new indestructible body to wreak havoc on the containment site. Once it had taken out the primary contingents of guards, it was free to have its fun with the rest, stalking defenseless researchers through the halls, making sure to induce maximum terror before finally striking the killing blow. Every single one of them died with a head full of demonic whispers. It told them of the mask's eternal dominion. Now it had found the perfect host. Nothing on Earth would stop it. Humans would be mere ants under its feet. 8 of 10 touched down and entered the building. Ramirez was point man, leading the others into the bowels of the blood-drenched containment site. They'd been briefed on what they were heading in for. 096 and 035 had reached symbiosis and were displaying unprecedented anomalous effects. Enter with extreme caution. They're beyond dangerous, even more so together than alone. Ideally, Ramirez would have wanted to go in with a comprehensive plan, but lives were on the line here. They needed to leap off the cliff and build their wings on the way down. It was only when they finally encountered the monster that they realized just how outmatched they were. Despite their best efforts, the combined speed, intelligence, and ferocity of the mask's new form allowed it to make short work of 8 of 10. Only Ramirez was left, heavily injured. Even if a miracle happened, he knew he wasn't getting out of here alive. The mask grabbed him with one of 096's claws and lifted him up. It would take its time with this one. Make him suffer, watch him squirm, destroy his mind. Ramirez felt the mask's psychic tendrils penetrate the membrane of his mind. Those whispers, those terrible whispers reciting all his worst fears with terrible glee. His gun was out of ammo. His knife was broken. All he had left on him was a pocket mirror, and that was his eureka moment. It was a long shot, but it was also his only shot. He reached out and grabbed the bottom of the mask, pulling for dear life. His other hand shot into his pocket and grabbed the mirror, opening its lid with a deft flick of his thumb. It was too fast for the mask to even register what was going on. Ramirez forced his eyes shut and lifted up the mirror. The mask saw its own reflection in the glass as the bottom of its face came loose, revealing the reflection of the face underneath. The mask squeezed, killing Ramirez, but it was already too late. It had finally seen the face of its host, and that would cost it dearly. The mask felt a sudden and tremendous pushback to its psychic forces, a blind despair and then rage that choked out everything. SCP-096 began to sob and howl. Somehow the mask was no longer in control. Despite its psychic protests, 096 reached up and tore the terrible mask from its face, tossing it against the wall with such force that it was embedded in the brickwork. Its last thoughts, as other mobile task force operators descended on the area to bag 096 and return it to its containment chamber, were,
"What the hell just happened?"
And the next thought that crossed the mind of the site director was, request site transfer for 035 as soon as possible. Don't want a repeat of this incident anytime soon.
Dr. Dan anxiously paced in his cell. It was the only way he'd been able to occupy himself for the past 6 months, save for poring through files and, when he was lucky, being able to oversee another failed termination attempt. He only stopped pacing when, for a brief and horrible moment, he realized that monster was probably doing the exact same thing in its big metal cube at this very moment. That horrible creature that he'd thrown away his life for a futile shot at killing. Perhaps the whole thing had been a fool's errand. After all, he was formerly a researcher under the employ of the SCP Foundation. Secure, contain, protect. They had truly sadistic beasts like SCP-106, the Nightmarish Old Man, and SCP-352 Baba Yaga in containment cells, and there was no plans to terminate either of them. They weren't the Global Occult Coalition for 343's sake. Why did Dr. Dan even want to terminate SCP-096 in the first place? He tried to explain it to them again and again, but his pleas had fallen on deaf ears. In his mind, the impetus for destroying the Shy Guy was terrifyingly clear. It was a monster that killed anyone or anything that looked at its face, even a photograph of it, even a tiny collection of pixels. When its rage state was induced, it seemed that nothing would stop it. It would have an intuitive psychic link to its victim, charge at them at breakneck speed, and only find its zen again once all of them were dead. And if a picture of SCP-096 was leaked onto the internet, it would cause a chain reaction that triggered an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. There were plenty of creatures and entities that the Foundation knew about that could theoretically bring about the apocalypse, but to him, 096 was the most realistic. It preyed upon the inherent curiosity and thirst for knowledge seated in every human heart. The same drive to simply know that led to the creation of the SCP Foundation would be humanity's doom in the face of an SCP-096 outbreak. And if such a thing happened, the Foundation would need to break the masquerade of secrecy to have any hope of saving humanity. In his many feverish nightmares, Dr. Dan had seen it all so clearly. The first photographs of SCP-096's face would be leaked online. Perhaps a few hundred people across the globe would look, in disparate enough locations that it would be almost impossible for the Foundation to detect and save all of them, as SCP-096 went on its bloody rampage. Of course, as the image proliferated, as images on the internet often do, the purview of 096's violence would only grow. People across the nation would start to take notice, and soon after that, across the world. Mysterious creature causing mass casualties would be the headline on every news desk, because why would anybody want to talk about anything else? Perhaps some foolish reporters would take video footage of the creature. Everyone has a phone these days with high-definition cameras. Pictures would be taken and posted. More and more of it would flood the internet. Too many simultaneous moles for even the SCP Foundation to whack. The news would spread. Panic and hysteria would spread. People wouldn't even know what's triggering all this horror if the Foundation didn't go public and tell them that it was the pictures that was killing everyone. And by then, wouldn't it already be too late? The antidote to fear is knowledge. It's why when anything goes wrong, we're refreshing timelines and feeds and news websites for any kind of information. And if you were told an unstoppable monster was killing scores of people and might be coming to a neighborhood near you sometime soon, wouldn't you want a good look at it? Wouldn't you want to know your enemy? Having no idea that the mere act of knowing was what sealed your horrible fate. By Dr. Dan's bleak estimations, if only several million people died as a result of this kind of scenario, it could be considered a positive outcome. He'd seen it all, but no matter how many times he tried to articulate this to his superiors, he wasn't listened to. They didn't take him or the threat that SCP-096 posed seriously. Every time he warned of the apocalyptic potential of SCP-096, he was simply told to get back to working on those goggles. It was why he needed to give those naysayers a demonstration. It was why a certain photograph needed to show up in the home of a certain mountaineer. It's why all those people had to die. There was no other way. The deaths of the civilians and the researchers and the mobile task force members were, of course, regrettable, but it was the only way to prevent the deaths of so many more. They gave him what he wanted, permission to put this gangly time bomb in the ground, even if the beast's death was inextricably tied to his own execution at the hands of the very employers who authorized him. The world was full of funny little ironies like that. Another one is that even though Dr. Dan now had the authorization and funding to terminate SCP-096, he was discovering that he lacked another important factor, the capability. They'd tried incinerating it, exposing it to massive amounts of radiation, exposing it to an insane degree of kinetic trauma, the equivalent of being hit by an out-of-control bullet train. They tested every kind of experimental, off-the-books weaponry that they had access to through various research projects. Proton blasts, lasers, high-intensity energy beams. Nothing. Even when they fried off every scrap of flesh on the monster's body, its unbreakable skeleton still remained, and in what seemed like no time at all, it'd be back in action. Its very existence seemed to mock him. A guard opened his cell door, staring disdainfully at the disgraced researcher. That same guard had slammed his head against a wall a month earlier. One of his friends had apparently been killed in the legendary 096 containment breach that set this whole sordid thing in motion.
"Up and at 'em, scumbag,"
he said in a gruff, surly voice, training a handgun on the doctor he knew wouldn't fight back.
"They need you in test chamber 6.
Dr. Dan allowed himself a small grin, imperceptible to the guard who clearly hated his guts. They'd approved his 096 versus 682 cross-test. Marvelous. How marvelous. To all the others, it would seem like just one more entry in a long line of 682 cross-tests. He thought it darkly funny. In his eyes, the Foundation had no hope of ever killing SCP-682. Its defining quality was being impossible to kill, and it didn't present nearly the threat to the entire world that 096 posed. Their futile attempts to murder the lizard were little more than a money sink to justify the site's exorbitant funding. But perhaps he could turn this to his benefit. Maybe SCP-682 would hold the secret to actually killing off his nemesis. Within 30 hours, Dr. Dan had his disappointing answer. Both anomalies had undeniably done a real number on each other, and Dr. Dan did take a kind of sick amusement in the mental trauma that SCP-682 had induced in 096. But ultimately, it was all for nothing. 682 had skinned 096 alive and melted off its flesh with acid, but once again, that indestructible skeleton stood firm. This had been the 27th termination attempt since the incident. The 27th failed termination attempt, Dr. Dan mentally corrected himself. 096's skeleton kept defeating them. Even their most ardent attempts to penetrate the bones and destroy the creature within had failed. During a previous attempt, they tried to access the brain by putting a diamond-hard drill into its eye sockets. Of course, it was the drill that actually broke, much to Dr. Dan's seemingly tireless frustration. Needless to say, in the debriefing interview with Dr. Carver, a researcher who once would have considered him a colleague, he wasn't in high spirits. If he managed to kill this thing, then he would always be the hero who made a terrible sacrifice in order to save many more lives. If he didn't kill 096, he was little more than the monster who murdered all those innocent people for nothing, though you'd never hear him say it out loud. If it wasn't for that damnable, indestructible skeleton, this monster would be long dead already. If only there was some way to break the creature's bones. That's when it hit him. SCP-173, the sculpture. A Site-19 icon often overlooked because of its more silent but deadly style, but undeniably one of the most frightening and dangerous anomalies out there. It had racked up a truly shocking body count since it was first interred at Site-19 in 1993, one broken neck at a time, and it's one of the few creatures out there that even the hard-to-destroy reptile himself is utterly terrified of. Perhaps a monster that practically has a PhD in breaking bones would be the ideal candidate to vandalize the Shy Guy's vertebrae. Once his proposal was greenlit for initial testing, Dr. Dan arranged for the Shy Guy, with a bag over his head of course, to be brought into a testing chamber with the ever-stoic SCP-173. When all of the researchers and guards were safely outside, all it took was a single blink to make all of Dr. Dan's darkest dreams come true. In the nanoseconds his eyes were closed, he heard the most beautiful sounds in the world. A loud, fleshy crunch, and a pained howl from 096. He opened his eyes to an equally wondrous sight. 096 doubled over at an unnatural angle. Its spine snapped between the 4th and 5th vertebrae, spinal fluid leaking down the creature's flank. That freaky little sculpture had done it. It had actually damaged the integrity of the Shy Guy's skeleton. It was at that moment that Dr. Dan knew he could kill this thing. Admittedly, there was a containment breach shortly after that when the bag slipped off of 096's head, and it charged through the nearby steel wall, killing multiple people before being subdued and recontained. But when it comes to projects involving Dr. Dan, a mere handful of innocent people being killed sits comfortably within the acceptable margin of error. A day later, Dr. Dan was standing before a crowded boardroom. with agents, researchers, and even a few members of the O5 Council in attendance. He explained his findings to them, and the fact that, even more importantly, they may have a way to bring the wretched existence of 096 to an absolute halt. His plans were approved. Not long after, he was putting them into motion. Dr. Dan was surrounded by researchers and heavily armed guards as 173 was escorted into the test chamber with a forklift. 096 was there, still bagged. Off to the side was a giant tub of hydrofluoric acid connected to a hose and injector attachment. If this didn't work, nothing would. Everyone stood back in a safe zone as 173 was released to do its thing. Crunch. Just like the previous time, 096's spine had been successfully snapped. Spinal fluid dribbled down its skin. Everyone had rushed into the chamber. One group kept 173 isolated with their stares. The other, headed by Dr. Dan, prepared the acid injector and shoved it into the breach in 096's spine. As the acid was pumped by the gallon into 096's bones, the creature let out the most horrifying wail. It kicked and bucked as more acid was pumped in, melting those indestructible bones from within. The creature even began to vomit acid as it panicked, melting the bag off of its own head. Some panicked and averted their gaze. Dr. Dan didn't. He stared directly at the creature's face for the first time as it melted in front of him with nothing short of pure elation. Had he won? Had he actually won? The creature let out a gurgling shriek and the guards opened fire. Their bullets splattered into the monster's melting flesh and bones as it hollered and shrieked. They didn't let up, firing up and down its body, spraying it with white-hot lead. It began to melt and bubble away, expanding into a great, gruesome puddle on the floor beneath them. Dr. Dan laughed like a madman. Even as the guards grabbed him and dragged him away from the foul-smelling, greasy mess, bubbling with chemical life, he just kept laughing. Even though he knew the death of 096 meant an equally swift death of his own, it didn't matter. It had all been for something. The world was saved. It was over. He'd finally won. A very strange anomaly sits in a humanoid containment cell in the minimum security wing of Site-17. He walks, talks, and looks like a man, but everything else is convoluted in a question mark. This is SCP-035, who, like his namesake, God, is likely to cause arguments whenever he's brought up. Is he the creator of all that exists, the basis for the Abrahamic faiths, or is he a pretender, a reality warper with immense power and predilection towards delusion, a courtesian of the house of Maladrog, Matthew, Methuselah, Yahweh? Who knows? Really, it depends on who you ask, and which stories you choose to believe. And few people enjoy a good story more than SCP-035 himself. If one day you take the time to visit him in his room and ask him to reveal a page in the long book of his personal history, he might be kind enough to tell you a story. A story like this, of an encounter with something monstrous that few others could hope to survive meeting face to face. Rewind a few thousand years. Nobody knows how many exactly. God, as he chooses to dub himself, walked across the cracked ground on worn sandals. It'd been some time since he'd seen an animal around here, and even longer since he'd seen a human being. Not that this bothered him. He'd never been bothered by his own company on a long walk like this. Of course, he could have sped up time or teleported, but where was the fun in that? He was a tourist in the world of sensation, of experience, of flesh, bone, dirt, blood, and sand. After all, where's the fun in creating a whole universe if you can't drop in now and then to visit and do as the Romans do? Not that the Romans would be around for another few thousand years. Even Atlas must occasionally shift the weight of the globe from his shoulders for a jaunt around the cosmic neighborhood, and whatever passes for fresh air in the vacuum. God whistled a tune to himself. It was a craggy, mountainous region he'd found himself in. The distant peaks had frosted caps, a breathtaking place where many truly had their breaths taken away. How humans will so happily risk their lives to do something extraordinary. It never ceased to amaze him. His stomach rumbled. Oh, how he enjoyed that sensation. One of the funny little quirks of this human form that he weaved for himself. It was no reason to be concerned. If memory served, from his last trip through the area a few decades before, there was a friendly village not far from here. They had always accepted him as a genial stranger, having no knowledge of his true power. God had always believed that a person's goodness is defined by how they treat those from whom they had nothing to gain. So it caused him great concern as he approached the village and saw great plumes of smoke rising into the sky. He was so shocked by this that he could decide to break his rule about walking as a man, in case there was still some way he could help. With a snap of his fingers, he disappeared and reappeared in the center of the village's town square. Total devastation. Huts and houses had been torn asunder. Broken weapons lay on the ground. Some places were on fire, others smeared with streaks of blood, like some terrible battle had occurred here. But something was wrong. No bodies, not one, from defender or assailant. How could a thriving village be so thoroughly destroyed and not leave a single corpse? It was an act so bizarre and depraved that it left even God puzzling. That was another downside of his human form. Here on Earth, he didn't have access to true omniscience. How could a mere human mind, bound by the constraints of linear time, ever truly comprehend the total of existence? Even attempting to do that here would melt the brain of his human body in its skull and leave it dribbling out of his nose and ears. Instead, he chose to walk around the ruins of the village and investigate firsthand. Arrows and broken spears and swords littered the ground. Some buildings were demolished, but there were no tracks or stray projectiles that could suggest the presence of siege weapons. No, these buildings looked like they were ripped apart. Some even still had claw marks. What terrible beast could have set upon this town and done this? Then he heard a voice, quiet and pleading, beneath some nearby rubble. A survivor. He rushed over to the pile and evaporated it with a thought. Underneath, a feeble old man, covered in stone dust, was quivering. God helped him up and guided him into one of the few remaining huts still standing in the village. They both took seats. God held up 2 hands, cradling empty space. 2 cups suddenly occupied that space, both filled with warm, healing tea. He passed the old man one of the cups while sipping from his own. He asked the old man if he'd seen what had happened. The old man told him no, he hadn't seen anything in decades. He'd been rendered blind in his youth. Little did either of them know, that very blindness was the only reason he was the sole survivor of the massacre. The blind man told God that one of the village's scouts had gone up into the mountain with a small hunting party. The group was gone for days, until one of the members, the youngest among them, returned weeping, frostbitten, and covered in blood. He said that his friends had been killed by a beast in the mountains, something that almost looked like a man, but terribly wrong. And its face, its awful, awful face. He would never forget it. He was just lucky to escape with his life when the others were torn apart. But when the young man returned, he'd brought the shadow of death with him. It was a curse that doomed the entire village, men, women, and children, to a terrible fate. And that fate was upon them a mere hour after the survivor had returned. Of course, there were gaps in the blind man's understanding, given he was lacking one of his major senses, but the sounds he could describe with perfect clarity. It was faint and distant at first, that awful wail, and the galloping, hands and feet thundering against the ground faster than any horse could move, getting closer and closer. Another villager saw it approaching and screamed. Then it was upon them. The villager screamed, but it screamed louder, always wailing and shrieking and sobbing like a monster crawling straight up from hell. People tried to fight it by the sounds of it. The blind man, with teary, blank eyes, recalled the sounds of arrows knocking and swords clashing against something. But even their greatest warriors had screamed and died. Those who saw it and tried to flee and hide were slaughtered all the same. Soon enough, there were only 2 sounds left in the village, the monster and the blind man, both weeping. He didn't understand why it never took him. It wasn't fair. It took everything else. To leave him here alive when everyone and everything he'd ever known was destroyed was a greater punishment than even death. After killing all of these innocents, the monster had simply wandered off to the mountains again, the sound of its quiet sobs getting smaller and smaller until it was gone altogether. God comforted the blind man as he wept for the loss of all his loved ones. He told the blind man that he would venture up to the mountains himself and confront the creature on its own territory, and at the very least, find out why it had done this terrible thing. But first, he must relocate the blind man to a safer place. He placed a hand on the blind man's shoulder and he vanished. He would appear in another friendly village, miles away. God sent a silent message into the minds of every villager.
Take good care of this man. He has undergone horrors you can't even imagine. Your kindness will be rewarded later. For that, you have my promise.
God sighed and turned his tired eyes to the distant mountains. A monster lurked up there, perhaps one of his own creations, or maybe a corruption of one of his creations. Either way, whatever existed without his knowledge existed without his consent, and he intended to know of the beast in the mountains. Though given what he'd seen already, he didn't expect to receive a warm welcome from this murderous demon. Miles away up in the mountains, the creature licked the blood from its cracked lips. It looked like it might have once been a human being or something that aspired to humanity or mocked it with its very existence. It was a huge, gangling beast, skin alabaster, eyes empty and soulless, dribbling rivulets of burning tears down a hideous, gaunt face. It crawled into the frozen mouth of a cave with great icicle fangs, wheezing and weeping. All it ever wanted was to be alone. Why did they have to keep interfering? Didn't they know what happened? All the terrible things they made it do. The creature curled its long, gangly body into the fetal position, scratching great ruts into the sides of its bald cranium with long, sharp fingers. Terrible things. Terrible, terrible things. And then there was a brilliant flash just a few feet away. The monster was surprised. It turned to see a figure silhouetted in the mouth of the cave. He wore sandals and thin robes. His eyes glowed with a kind of power that the monster didn't recognize. This stranger stared at the monster without an ounce of fear in his heart. He stared right into its eyes, unwavering. No, 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 no! It could feel it again, the rage bubbling up deep down. A cauldron of seething anger. It hated the feeling like being lowered into a vat of molten metal. Unspeakable fire and pain coursing through every vessel. It began to weep and scream while the stranger in the cave mouth just watched, not moving a muscle.
Do you know who I am?
The stranger asked with a deep voice that betrayed almost infinite power, knowledge, and wisdom. But it wouldn't change the outcome here. The monster bounded at him at speeds that wouldn't be seen again until jet planes and bullet trains are invented millennia into the future. Its jaws were hanging impossibly wide, fangs borne, its arms extended, and deadly claws ready to strike. But before those terrible hands could close around the stranger, he vanished. The monster stumbled and rolled across the snow, confused. What trickery was being used here?
I'll take that as a no,
said the voice from behind him.
You ought to show your father some respect. More respect than you gave to those poor people down in the village, at least.
Seething, the creature turned and saw the stranger standing back in the darkness of the cave, staring at him. But the beast didn't have the capacity for awe or holy terror, only violence. Boundless, limitless, unstoppable violence. It darted towards the stranger again, trying to strike him. Somehow it was like fighting an empty robe. Not a single one of its deadly strikes seemed to hit the stranger. The stranger leaped backwards, putting some space between himself and the monster, but still not breaking a sweat. He breathed in deeply, then exhaled. The breath came out like a mighty typhoon, shocking even the monster with its sudden force. It was blown backwards, a leaf in the wind, until its long claws dug into the ground and anchored it in place. The stranger gave a wry smile at this, impressed.
My, you're certainly a tenacious one, aren't you?
He said.
Perhaps we can talk for a little while instead of fighting. I want to know why you killed all those people.
No answer. The beast roared. its mighty limbs pounding into the ground as it closed the gap between itself and the stranger in fractions of a second. It would kill him, rend him, destroy him just like all the others. He'd left it no choice. Suddenly, the ground below it seemed to give way. The creature was confused. It looked down to see that the ancient stone below had somehow taken on the properties of a liquid, and it was sinking. The beast panicked and it began to thrash. It was a strong swimmer, but it didn't expect to need to swim here. The shock was too much, and soon the ground submerged it entirely, muffling its terrible roars and shrieks. And just like that, the ground was solid again, trapping the beast inside. The stranger stepped forward and looked at the ground.
"A much-needed timeout,"
he said.
"You do yourself no good struggling like this."
Despite its terrible capacity for evil, God couldn't help but admire the beast, at least on the level of construction. It was so pared down, so unburdened. A killer to the core, but seemingly unkillable. Had he made this creature? Billions of species, and the species those in turn had created through billions of years of breeding and evolution. And somewhere along the line, this thing happened. It was easy even for the universe's creator to lose track of some of the tinier variables. And in the grand scheme of things, even this monster was still a tiny variable. But right here, right now, it was still one hell of a problem. The ground rumbled below God. Cracks formed. The mountain peak shook. God raised an eyebrow, genuinely impressed, as the monster ripped free of its stone prison and re-entered the fray. It roared and screamed still, its blank eyes fixed on him. Its skeletal body throbbed and heaved with power. Unlike any other creature in nature, it was almost like the longer their conflict went on, the more energized the beast became. God sighed. All those poor villagers. They never stood a chance against this monster. It lunged for him, even faster and stronger than before. He teleported out of the way in the nick of time, and the beast's claws cleaved through a nearby cave wall, effortless. God materialized nearby, but he didn't have time to speak. The beast lunged again and again and again. Every time he reappeared, the beast went for him with impossible speed. Deciding to widen the playing field, God teleported to the top of the mountain. The creature, somehow sensing his presence, vaulted upwards and tunneled through the roof of the cave, bursting out of the ground in front of God, who was floating just slightly off the ground.
"It would be wise of you to stop,"
God carefully intoned.
"All this time, you know, I've been going easy on you. You don't want to find out what the wrath of God looks like."
Storm clouds were gathering above. Mighty thunder roared across the sky. The beast was undeterred. It roared and galloped towards God, and God, in turn, called down a response. A volley of lightning the likes of which the world has never seen before or since struck down on the charging monster. The sudden white flash could sting the eyes from miles away. The monster shrieked from the blast, feeling its flesh lift off its bones and atomize in the sheer heat of the electricity around it. It could smell itself cooking. The lightning blast only lasted for a few seconds, but for the beast, it felt like eternity. When the onslaught stopped, the air was still heavy with electrical potential. God stared down at the black scorch mark on the side of the mountain where the creature had been standing. All the snow within a mile had been evaporated by the blast. It was a raw display of the power of nature that would make even Zeus tremble in his sandals. And yet, there was still movement. Something started to get up from the burnt patch where nothing should be left alive. A blackened skeleton, rising shakily from the ash, but still very much alive. As it started to rise, new flesh began growing over its bones, little by little. Even God was astonished by the sight of it. He'd never seen a creature cling so ardently to life in spite of having truly unsurmountable power amassed against it. It was up against God, and still, it fought. The monster tottered on its freakishly long limbs, still disoriented, unusually staggered for a creature driven by such single-minded violent purpose. When enough of its face grew back to do so, it began to weep and sob again, tears streaking down its terrible face. Looking at this creature after all of this, God couldn't help but feel a new emotion, pity. He lowered himself to the ground and approached the creature.
like none had ever done before. He gathered it up into his arms and he held it, feeling its heaving, wretched sobs against him. The beast was in so much pain, he could feel it radiating from within.
Speak, my son.
God said in a soft, fatherly voice, and for the first and only time, the monster spoke.
Can look, can see. Make me hurt people. Don't want hurt people. Can look, please.
That was all it managed to choke out before devolving back into unintelligible babble. But it was enough. Enough for God to understand its pain. He did not know if it would be right to change the monster's nature. Is it ever right to truly change anyone's nature? But it was within his almost limitless power to grant it one reprieve from pain. He settled the beast in the snow below him. It was quiet and still. And God said unto the beast,
Rest now, child. Rest for thousands of years if you must. I hope only that when you eventually awaken, you feel differently.
And so another story from the catalog of SCP-035. Of course, it leaves us with certain questions, chief among them being, is it true? Did 343 and 096 have this chance encounter long ago? Or is this just another tall tale from an anomaly who fancies himself a deity? We have our truth, and you have yours. Let us know what you believe down below in the comments. He's waiting for you in the dark. He sits cross-legged, still as a placid lake, and patient as a praying monk 6 feet deep in meditation. He's been like this for so long. His body oil slicked with deadly black grease, skin ancient and haggard, eyes black and flat with the kind of calm you'd only find in crawling insects and great white sharks. His lipless mouth is stretched across his jawbone in an ugly black rictus. He may be an old man, but trust us, he's got plenty of new tricks he'd love to show you. He sat in the loneliest place in the world, the deep, dark bowels of an SCP Foundation containment site, surrounded by a complex confluence of containment measures, different shapes, running liquids, bright lights, the kind of steel so thick a nuclear weapon would only leave it scuffed. All the things that had a tendency to confuse him, because that's all they ever did. The old man laughed to himself very quietly. All the people out there are so scared of him because of one immutable fact. He isn't trapped here, he's just resting. By virtue of his unique anomalous abilities to pass through solids at will and resist any form of physical damage they can dole out, there is no way to really contain him like all the others. All the SCP Foundation could hope to do was make leaving inconvenient enough for him to make his little adventures on the outside less appealing than just sitting around doing nothing. After all, he had all the time in the world. And when you always have a later, there's a lot less pressure to do anything now. But like all thinking creatures, and please be aware that SCP-106, the wretched, terrifying old man, is very much a thinking creature, he was subject to occasional boredom. And when most people are bored, they might play a video game, watch a few YouTube videos, or rewatch It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia for the 5th time. But for the old man, killing boredom involved, well, killing people. But not just killing people, of course. Truth be told, for him, killing was really the least entertaining part of the whole affair. The screams, the begging, the desperate pleas, warm tears on shaking cheeks, convulsions of pain, cold sweats, fear so intense it gives way to gibbering madness, the dull sheen of dead hope in their eyes when they realize that their doom is inevitable, and that he, their captor, their torturer, would decide the exact moment they slipped into the void. Oh, that was what he lived for. If you could call what the old man did living. He cracked his neck and licked his teeth. Was he salivating? All those thoughts about pain seemed to have got him worked up. He could feel the distant thumping of his heart, old black blood pumping through the dusty corridors of his vascular system.
synapses booming and sparking with excitement at the thought of plumbing new depths of human misery, like a scholar of suffering, a pioneer of pain. All those silly Foundation drones, with the audacity to think they're in control, he'd teach them to scream again. Meanwhile, in the room for the old man's containment chamber, all hell was breaking loose. Monitors on the monster's vitals were all spiking. Heart and brain activity peaked, just as they always did before the old man decided to get active. Cameras in his containment chamber showed him rising steadily to his feet, cracking his joints, limbering up. His body started to produce that terrible corrosive mucus at an accelerated rate, pooling around his feet and unleashing squalls of noxious fumes as it melted into the floor. Years of Foundation testing, and they still couldn't find any material that could withstand that vile black slop. As the old man began strolling towards the wall, a containment specialist in the control room grabbed a nearby phone and sounded the alarm for the containment breach. They needed a mobile task force, and every guard on site mobilized to tackle 106 before he got into the facility proper and started causing havoc. They couldn't risk it escaping either. The infamous incident when the old man escaped for a Halloween massacre still haunted the nightmares of many a staff member. He had to be stopped. Now. A small fighting force was quickly armed and assembled, along with armor and several high-intensity portable lights to hopefully slow the monster down in time for them to grab a D-class and set up the femur breaker. By the time they all reached the hallway they intended to use as a choke point for the escape, the old man was already halfway through the outer layer of defense, phasing through the wall with that same terrible, manic grin he always had when he was about to inflict terrible violence for the sheer fun of it. The guards and task force members trained their lights and weapons on him. All of them had seen terrible things on the job, the kind of things that would saddle almost anyone with a lifetime of trauma, but almost nothing compared to the horror of direct engagement during a 106 containment breach. That terrible old coffin dodger was hell on two legs. When they discovered to their horror that the lights didn't seem to be slowing him down as much as anticipated, they fell back on Plan B. That B standing for blast the living hell out of him with everything they had. The personnel opened fire, pumping round after round into his dark form. While each gave a loud, meaty splatter, the old man didn't even flinch. When he was close enough, all those months of lethargy gave way to sudden, deadly speed. In many ways, the old man was like a crocodile, a fierce and intelligent ambush predator who conserved his energy wisely. He could seem so deceptively languid that you could easily mistake him for something slow and harmless, but when you got within arm's reach, the sudden quickness and ferocity would take you off guard, and by then, it's already too late. Within 30 seconds, the old man was the only thing left alive in that hallway. All the guards and task force operatives sent to slow him down lay dead, dripping with his black mucus. There was silence, save for the quiet fizzing of the mucus eating into their clothes and skin. The old man sighed. How boring. He'd killed so many people now. It all started to seem a little samey. How many screams could you hear before they all just blended into a single shrill whine? You can get sick of even your favorite meal if you eat it too often. But that didn't matter. The old man had a different order of business today. He happened to be inside an SCP Foundation containment facility, filled with so many fascinating specimens of non-human entities that the one they called SCP-096 simply couldn't wait to torture. He'd only met a small portion of the ones they had contained here, but given what a fascinating experience his past attack on his fellow anomalies was, he couldn't wait to meet some more. Meanwhile, the site's top brass did all they could to try to mobilize a second response to the rogue senior citizen from Hell currently strolling through their high-security containment facility. Could they get in contact with other mobile task forces deployed in the area? Maybe they could get Hammer Down or Samsara in on this mess before anything got really out of hand. The old man seemed more intent on something this time. They suspected even the femur breaker might not work in luring him back until he claimed whatever he deemed to be his prize. Maybe they should contact the 05 Council. Security guards were tracking 106's progress through the facility via their vast networks of security cameras. They warned any research, administration, and janitorial staff to clear out of his path, unless they felt like being tortured to death. He hadn't dragged anyone into his pocket dimension yet, so whoever that privilege was reserved for would probably be getting a particular sticky experience. They could only speculate as to the silent beast's intentions. One guard noticed something. When cross-referencing 106's movements with a map of the facility, they were able to triangulate where he was heading, straight for the containment chamber of SCP-096. The guard's lips curled into a slight smile, thinking, if one of you freaks can actually kill the other, maybe something positive will come out of this disaster. The old man was having a stroll down memory lane. The time prior, when he broke out of his cell and decided to hassle his fellow inmates, was certainly eventful. He wound up in the company of some cantankerous reptile and a Korean foxwoman, an unlikely pair if ever there was one. After finding himself in a room with them, he decided they should have a little more privacy and dragged them back into his pocket dimension for further fun. Of course, with two at once, his attention had been a little split. They spent as much time tussling with each other as resisting his attempts to torment them. They definitely put him through his paces that day, and he gave far better than he got. After so many hours of brutal mutilation, there was barely any of the lizard left, despite its frustrating insistence on quickly healing from so many of its wounds. Still, it was good exercise, even if the results had been a little less than satisfying. If he could get another anomaly alone, though, he'd be able to take his time and really savor the pain he caused. Oh, that sounded heavenly. Soon he came upon an incredibly strange containment chamber that quickly caught his eye. It looked like a huge metal cube, with no way in or out, not even a seam. Whatever was trapped in there, the old man thought, it must be something that even the fools at the SCP Foundation really, truly wanted nothing to do with. But even more so than the strange sight, it was the sound that drew the old man in, tempting him like a siren song. It was weeping, a soft, sobbing keen that betrayed a bottomless well of misery. Whatever was making that crying sound had known true despair, or whatever passes for true despair before you've had a close encounter with the old man in his pocket dimension. The old man grinned and thought,
Oh, Sonny, I'll give you something to really cry about.
He stepped forward and faced his way into the metal cube. The creature was in the corner. In contrast to that stupid lizard, this monster was pleasingly humanoid, with, presumably, all the familiar pain points. Splendid. The only real difference was color and proportion. It was far longer and ganglier than the average human, with grayish skin and no hair anywhere on its body. Still, it was something the old man could work with. The creature didn't even seem to register his presence. It just sat crumpled in the corner, weeping. Still grinning his lunatic grin, the old man approached and rested a moist hand on the creature's shoulder. Its pale skin began to fizzle from the intruder's corrosive touch. A pool of vile sludge began spreading out beneath his feet until the creature was encompassed too. Little by little, they sank into the old man's favorite place out of the world, the pocket dimension, his own personal, eternal, infinite dungeon, where the only laws are pain and terror for all but the old man himself. Little did he know, this time, the scores may be a little more even on that front. They both stood in that terrifying labyrinth of hallways and chambers where the old man had made countless lives infinitely worse than any terrible afterlife that could follow them. And still, this creature didn't seem to change its reaction. He was almost irritated by it. And what's more, this whole time, the creature hadn't even turned to look at him. He'd have to fix that too. The old man, with his shocking strength, gripped the monster's shoulder and whipped him around, staring into his face, bearing his black eyes and manic smile. But he couldn't help find what looked back at him disconcerting. Its eyes were blank and white, its face stretched and warped into a permanent grimace, like Munch's old painting, The Scream. And the second the old man laid eyes on it, that's exactly what it did. Its gaping mouth let out the most terrible wail the old man had ever heard in all his years of torturing. It was a scream of unknowable sadness and fear, but somehow the old man sensed that this creature didn't fear him. It feared itself, feared what it was about to do. What the hell had he dragged down here with him? Without warning, the terrible wail soon gave way to sudden and ferocious aggression. Just like the old man had dealt out to a group of Foundation guards and mobile task force agents earlier that same night, it was only out of a mix of pure luck and his own finely tuned animal instinct that the old man was able to dodge the first strike from the creature's long, lithe forelimb. He couldn't believe it. They were in his special place, and this victim of his had the audacity to fight back? Well, he'd soon put this monster in its place. As the monster continued roaring and swiping for him, the old man simply walked backwards into a nearby wall and disappearing into a black stain. Of course, the monster, better known to the Foundation as SCP-096 or the Shy Guy, simply crashed through the wall to give chase, but on the other side, just another wall, he disappeared. How? Typically when something sees the face of the Shy Guy, he immediately has a kind of intuitive connection to them. He can sense their presence. It's burned into his mind, a homing beacon, an unstoppable imperative. He knows exactly where they are and how to get them. But nothing about this situation was typical. The Shy Guy felt all the murderous rage he normally did, but the rest was just static. Where was the life he needed to abolish hiding? Suddenly, the old man emerged behind him and forced his hand into the Shy Guy's back. His fist melted straight through flesh and skin, causing the creature to let out another terrible wail. But as could be expected, they didn't leave a scratch on the Shy Guy's indestructible skeleton. The Shy Guy pulled a 180 and swung for the old man again, but he was already gone. Here in the pocket dimension, the old man had the ultimate home turf advantage. Here, space and time were his playthings. In the infinite twisting, labyrinthian walls of the pocket dimension, the old man wasn't just the devil, he was God too. But it would take far more than some cheap tricks and bodily harm to dissuade the Shy Guy from his sole purpose in life. He began running through the old man's personal maze like a crazed lab rat, tearing through wall after wall, forever searching for the monster that trapped it here. It would see the smiling face of that rotten old man every so often, the flash of black eyes and dirty teeth in shadows. But every time it tried to strike the shadows, there would be nothing there. And every time he got a chance, the old man would emerge from the shadows behind the Shy Guy to strike back, clawing into his flesh and vanishing again before the trapped beast could retaliate. The nasty old sadist was now starting to have some fun. It was a reflex test, a classic game of high-stakes whack-a-mole, and every time the creature failed to strike him, its distress only seemed to grow. This was perfectly fine for the old man. After all, he enjoyed a little mental torment as much as he loved physical torture, and a human would have died or given in to despair long before now. This monster's wonderful mix of resilience and pain made it a great chew toy. The old man kept up this routine, baiting and striking until something unanticipated happened. He appeared, waited for the swing, disappeared as it approached, then reappeared behind the Shy Guy to deliver another painful strike. This time, however, it seemed his victim had anticipated his pattern. Before he could hit the creature, the Shy Guy turned, quicker than anything the old man had ever seen, and hit him with such force he flew through several walls in his own maze, shattering them as he went. He hit the ground, stunned by the fact that the Shy Guy had actually landed a hit, but he wasn't done. The shrieking monster came bounding after him. Before the old man could stand, it struck him again and again and again, pounding his vile body into the ground, which cracked and crumbled. The old man sneered and sank into a puddle of his mucus on the ground. The old man was gone again. SCP-096 screamed in a mix of rage, despair, and frustration, so consumed with its hunt that it didn't notice the pool of corrosive mucus was slowly growing. It began to rise, bubbling and hissing at SCP-096's feet, getting deeper and deeper and deeper as the walls rose taller and taller around it. The creature wailed until a tide of the awful stuff reached its face and cascaded down its throat, melting all the organs within. As the creature was fully submerged, SCP-106 manifested atop the wall and looked down, smiling spitefully. He thought,
"Oh, you may have had me there, boyo, but in the end, I always win. Nothing could survive that."
And yet bubbles still rose from the slop below. The old man gritted his rotten teeth and balled his fists in quiet anger. Moments later, back in our dimension, a portal opened in the ground of SCP-096's containment chamber. It vomited out SCP-096's skeleton, smothered in bubbling black goo, and SCP-106. 096 would probably be fully regenerated within a couple of hours, and if 682's encounter with him was anything to go by, probably extremely unwilling to interface with the old man. And the old man himself, who couldn't help but feel a little humiliated by the whole experience, was glad the two of them would probably never meet again. He left the regenerating 096 and commenced the walk of shame back to his containment chamber. They didn't even need the femur breaker. He just felt like having a sit down and processing it all. Nobody else would ever know what happened in the pocket dimension that day, and for the old man's pride, that was probably for the best. But he'd know. He'd always know. By the night's end, he was sitting in his containment chamber again, forlornly wondering,
God damn it, old timer. Have you lost your edge?
It happened in 1981, in a small rural village in West Germany. Siegfried Geis, 9 years old, ran across the bitter snow, tears freezing to his cheeks. It was Christmas Day, and not long ago he'd been so happy. He was celebrating with his family, his mother, his father, and his young sister, the centers of his universe, when that monster had attacked and destroyed everything he'd ever known. The White Terror, the destroyer of Christmas cheer, the Yule Man, SCP-036. Though of course, young Siegfried had no idea. In hindsight, Siegfried's parents had been noticing strange things in the lead-up to Christmas Day. Unfamiliar bumps and knocks, strange smells coming from the attic, the occasional tall, dark silhouette on the horizon outside their isolated old farmhouse. But in all the hustle and bustle of the season, nobody really paid the proper attention to all the signs of an incoming Weihnacht event. Every eerie feeling was just written off as stress or overactive imaginations. None of the Geis family knew about the true danger they were facing until they woke up to see the Yule Man standing over them, sharpening a rusty blade and staring at them with hungry, sadistic eyes. "Merry Christmas," the creature rasped and chuckled. Siegfried was lucky to escape alive, but of course he would never see his family again. He'd be picked up a day or so later, traumatized, catatonic, and almost frozen to death. When he was finally able to speak again, he spoke of a monster having killed his family. When the police investigated his home and found the remains, they deemed it to be the work of an all-too-human serial killer, and poor Siegfried Geis was entered into the foster system. Years of work with psychiatric professionals tried to convince young Siegfried that the monster he claimed to see, the unnaturally tall, gnarled, bony freak with those shimmering black eyes, was merely a product of his trauma. But he knew the truth. He always knew. What he encountered that day, the thing that took his family, was nothing less than a true monster. And at 9 years old, Siegfried made a vow he would one day kill the monster, no matter what it took. When Siegfried was finally adopted and returned to school, he did everything he could to apply himself academically. He had no interest in friends or romantic relationships, even as he grew into his teenage years. The only thing that drew his interest, in addition to the perfection of his academic life, was his own private research into the supernatural. He became an expert in all things occultic and anomalous, sightings of ghosts, phantoms, aliens, and monsters. He wanted to know it all. No, needed to know it all. He would arm himself with knowledge, wanting to know everything he could in advance of the confrontation that would be his final destiny. He also began obsessively researching attacks similar to the ones that killed his family, and found an eerie pattern seemingly to unfold all over the Northern Hemisphere. During the 12 days of Christmas, entire families would be found dead in their homes, mutilated horrifically, often with children having gone completely missing. They happened far enough apart in terms of time and space that no connection was drawn between the events, all just random attacks according to the police and media. Weren't the connections obvious? He didn't understand it. It was almost like there was some kind of sweeping cover-up obscuring the true culprit behind all these killings. The same beast that destroyed his life. As Siegfried, now known to most as Dr. Geis, ascended through his time at university, he became one of Germany's foremost scholars on the occult, with several published papers and books that drew fascination of fellow experts and laymen alike. But most importantly of all,
Siegfried's work got the attention of the SCP Foundation. They reached out to the ambitious rising star of the paranormal world and offered him a research position. Dr. Guise was elated and said that he would happily take the role if they answered one question for him. Did they know anything about a horrific humanoid monster that attacked families across the Northern Hemisphere around Christmas time? This was the moment when Dr. Siegfried Guise, after decades of searching, finally came to know about SCP-4666. He had access to all of the SCP Foundation's information on the monster, putting him several steps closer to what had always been his ultimate goal: killing that godforsaken thing. But this would be easier said than done. After all, if the Yule Man was easy to track, the Foundation would have captured and contained him long before now. His attacks could occur anywhere across the Northern Hemisphere, making catching him the world's largest game of whack-a-mole. But this was a game that Dr. Guise had more than enough patience to play. Over the following years, Dr. Guise worked as hard as humanly possible, not just at the case of SCP-4666, but at every piece of work the Foundation had to offer him. Much like his ruined childhood, Guise made no effort to interact, no effort to form social connections. He just worked and worked and worked and worked with single-minded passion, soon developing a reputation as one of the most hard-working and dependable figures in the SCP Foundation's European division. It was this kind of work ethic that soon saw him promoted to senior researcher, and then a site director. He had more control over information, resources, and manpower than ever before. It was almost time. He could sense it. Delegating other tasks to his subordinates, Dr. Guise began to work on his masterpiece, an advanced algorithm connecting police, social media, and surveillance databases across the Northern Hemisphere. You see, while Dr. Guise had never faltered in his quest, neither had the Yule Man. Every year, more families disappeared or were horrifically murdered, and every death weighed on Guise. He saw them as a personal failing of his inability to fulfill his destiny. But the Yule Man was a creature of habit, and it would be that very adherence to habit that Guise used to destroy it. Using the algorithm he created, they would perfectly track and triangulate the home most likely to be the subject of a dreaded Riesenacht event, with greater accuracy and precision than ever before. The year was 2022. Dr. Guise was convinced that this time, he would be the one to claim victory and vengeance. There was one thing he didn't tell his Foundation compatriots, though. As he put the pieces in place for the final showdown, he had no intention of containing the Yule Man. This time, he would destroy it. Using his newfound influence as a well-respected site director, he requested the transfer of a few high-profile anomalies, as well as the services of a crack mobile task force death squad. It was time. The Yule Man watched the house from a distance. He'd been observing for days, watching the nice, happy family within. What pleasure it would bring him to destroy them, and take what's left to his workshop for further fun. Tonight would be the night that he claimed them. They were all blissfully unaware, and lived in an isolated rural area where nobody but him would hear all the wonderful screaming. The second the lights went out inside the house, he would strike, and bring about some Christmas fear. When the last window went dark, the Yule Man drew a long, rusty blade out of his bag of tricks and approached the house. He crept in through one of the windows. Locks had never been a problem for him. This whole process had played out hundreds of times. He barely even needed to think about it now. He crept in past the presents around the Christmas tree, found the stairs and began to climb. He'd find them in their beds, one by one, and take his time, savoring the pain, savoring the fear. He went into the youngest one's bedroom first, his lips pulled back into a manic grin. There was the little boy, tucked in under his quilt, like a present waiting to be unwrapped. He grabbed the sheet with his long, gnarled fingers and pulled it back, only to see a plastic dummy underneath, with a stun grenade fixed to its chest. Before the Yule Man could even react, the stun grenade exploded into his face, blinding him with a sudden white light and ringing in his ancient ears. The next thing he heard was a rugged military voice yelling, "Squad Alpha, move in!" Seconds later, the upstairs landing was filled with mobile task force operatives with assault rifles. They aimed and opened fire into the Yule Man, peppering him with painful bullets. He wasn't used to his victims fighting back like this. Truthfully, it even caught him off guard. But sadly for those brave task force operatives, it would not be enough to kill him. The Yule Man gripped his rusty knife and lunged at Squad Alpha. Moments later, they were all dead, and the furious Yule Man was trudging back down the stairs. There had been no satisfaction in this slaughter. How had they caught him like this? Perhaps he'd go eat some of his servants in his workshop to make himself feel better. As he walked back across the living room, past the Christmas tree, past all the presents, the television flickered into life. Staring at him from the screen was the grinning face of Dr. Siegfried Geis, now 50 years old. And the most insane part was that the Yule Man somehow recognized him, the one who got away 41 years prior. "Hello, old friend. You're looking a little glum," Siegfried said on the screen. "I take it that you did not enjoy the surprise party I just threw for you. Don't worry, the night isn't over yet. After all, you haven't even opened your presents." With that, the presents under the tree, which were actually packed with C4 plastic explosives, detonated, leveling the entire house with the Yule Man still inside. The explosion could be heard for miles as a great pillar of smoke rose up into the air. Several hundred meters away, Dr. Siegfried Geis waited and watched, flanked by Foundation agents and more mobile task force soldiers, taking in the majesty of the explosion. Dr. Geis remained steely-eyed and watched the blaze. Somehow he knew that even that would not be enough to end the monster permanently. He nodded to the lieutenant he'd brought with him.
"Squad out! Squad Bravo! Time to engage!"
The man barked in response. The remaining agents and MTF operatives, armed with assault rifles and submachine guns, descended on the burning wreckage of the house. Moments later, a tall, dark figure, the Yule Man, injured but alive, crawled out of the blaze. Immediately, the team opened fire, giving the monster everything they had. But once again, everything was not enough. The creature pulled out two long, rusty knives and leaped into the fray, making short work of the Foundation brass. Soon enough, it stood alone on blood-stained snow, until it caught another bullet in the head. Dr. Siegfried Geis was standing there, the last one alive to face the Yule Man, leveling a revolver. The Yule Man scowled. Geis held his steely gaze. "We meet again, at long last," Siegfried said. "You killed my family. You've killed so many others. Tonight, it is your turn, Yule Man. This is your Wisnacht." Geis opened fire as the Yule Man charged towards him, taking each shot in stride. Even as the Yule Man closed the distance, Geis didn't flinch. His resolve was steely. It made the Yule Man feel confused and furious that he didn't detect an ounce of fear in this man. Even when he drove a knife into the site director's stomach, Siegfried dropped to his knees and collapsed as the Yule Man ripped the knife back out. His gun clattered to the ground. It had been a mortal blow, and still, he seemed unfazed.
"Why aren't you afraid?"
The Yule Man growled. Siegfried spat blood and said,
"You took my family 41 years ago. Everything since then has just been killing time until I got to see them again. Where you're going, all you'll ever see are flames and torment."
The Yule Man, furious, stabbed Siegfried again, this time through the heart. The doctor was dying, his life's work having seemingly amounted to nothing. But with the last of his strength, he reached into his coat and pulled out something, a little gift he'd requested from one Dr. Alto Clef before putting his plan into action. Dr. Siegfried Geis lifted a photo of SCP-096 right in front of the Yule Man's eyes.
"Merry Christmas,"
he said with his last breath. The Yule Man was confused. A photograph? Was that it? Was that really this foolish little boy's trump card after all this time? What a waste. Then, without a moment's warning, SCP-096 barreled into the Yule Man, sending them both rolling across the snow. One of Siegfried's preparations was to have SCP-096's containment cube temporarily relocated to only a mile away from the ambush site, to avoid collateral damage. If everything else failed, then SCP-096 would be their Hail Mary pass, their finishing move. And it worked marvelously. As strong and evil as the Yule Man was, he'd been weakened by the night's battle, and the Shy Guy was an order of magnitude more powerful than his sadistic foe. The Yule Man screamed in horror as SCP-096 set upon him with claws and teeth. After hundreds of years inflicting it on others, the Yule Man had died in terror, and Dr. Siegfried Geis had died with a smile on his face. Hello, one and all, and welcome back to the Anomatron 6000, our patented device for projecting any seemingly improbable scenario for your viewing indulgence. And today, we decided to do something slightly different with it. Here at SCP Explained, we usually activate the Anomatron to bring you encounters between the anomalous denizens of the SCP universe and other fictional characters, like Doctor Strange fighting the Scarlet King, or Abel crossing paths with Batman. But this Anomatron experiment is one of our more unusual, to say the least. If you've been subscribed to us for a while, some of you might remember our video, What if SCP-096 was put inside SCP-914? In it, the Shy Guy was tricked into entering the input booth of the anomalous refinement machine during a containment breach. What emerged was maybe the handsomest man to ever live, beautiful both on the outside and within. A lot of our comments pointed out that this refined version of 096 felt akin to a GIGA Chad, and that got us thinking, what if SCP-096 was to encounter the real GIGA Chad? Well, the Anomatron 6000 has a few different answers for us. Scenario 1, or as we like to call it, the obvious outcome, pits the thin humanoid anomaly against the man behind the meme. Ernest Kalimov is a Russian fitness trainer and model, forever immortalized in the annals of internet history by a series of black and white photoshopped pictures that garnered him the nickname of Giga Chad. Thanks to his practically perfect 90-degree jawline and muscular physique, Kalimov seemingly unknowingly became the archetype for the ultra-masculine, handsome man. However, the man behind the Giga Chad meme is still just a man. The infamous photos of him were heavily edited for an art project known as Sleek in Tears, and while Ernest does sport some impressive muscles from all his time at the gym, that strength isn't enough to save him from the Shy Guy. After all, he is still just a man. According to the Anomatron's predictions, the most likely outcome if the two were ever to meet would end pretty similarly to the grim fate of many others who have gazed upon the face of SCP-096. The moment Ernest looks at the creature, he would, in all likelihood, activate 096's rage state. His physique and above-average level of fitness might give him a slight advantage, allowing him to perhaps outrun the Shy Guy for longer than most, but ultimately, Ernest Kalimov would be able to run, but not hide, from SCP-096. The creature would track him down and hone in on him with anomalous speed, dispatching him before returning to its usual docile sobbing state. The result, an SCP-096 victory. Now we know what you're thinking, is that really it? We had the same reaction too. But hold on for a minute. After giving the machine an additional set of variables, we were able to get a few more interesting outcomes out of the Anomatron. Which brings us to the result that we've given the title of Scenario 2, Shy Harder. Of course, Ernest Kalimov might be the face of an internet meme and ultimately just a very strong Russian man in comparison to the anomalous traits of SCP-096. But the Giga Chad? The Giga Chad is more than a man. So much more than the sum of his parts. Existing within the online zeitgeist since as early as 2017, the Giga Chad is far more powerful than a mere mortal. He doesn't just represent idealized standards of over-exaggerated masculinity like the action movie heroes of the 1980s. The Giga Chad embodies those ideas. He is the very notion of a physically perfected human specimen given form. You may not like it, but peak performance doesn't even come close to the Giga Chad, and neither does SCP-096. Even at the top of its game, the creature quite literally pales in comparison to its imposing opponent. In Scenario 2, Shy Harder, the Anomatron 6000 predicted that if the two were to meet, the scales would tip in the complete opposite direction from the first outcome. For that was SCP-096 against the man, but against the meme himself. Well, this fight is no contest. As a matter of fact, it's hardly even a fight, certainly not a fair one, and instead is more of an execution. From the moment the unstoppable tower of muscle and perfect angular jawline that is the GIGA Chad clasps eyes on SCP-096, it's practically the beginning of the end. The Shy Guy doesn't even lift, bro. But GIGA Chad can bench 1 million times his own body weight in his sleep. So when SCP-096 comes racing towards him, intent on killing him just for looking at its screeching wide-jawed face, the GIGA Chad does what the GIGA Chad does best. He lifts. Grabbing SCP-096 with ease as it comes to him screeching, GIGA Chad casually hoists the creature off the ground. Although he's only using the tiniest portion of his immense and infinite strength, it's more than enough force to send the Shy Guy soaring upwards, crashing through multiple ceilings as it's sent hurtling up the numerous floors of the Foundation facility above. Of course, being lifted is hardly going to kill the Shy Guy outright. The creature is known to be invulnerable after all. But it's not like GIGA Chad can go down easily either. Don't forget, this is no mere mortal, but an internet meme incarnate. And on the internet, nothing ever dies. His perpetual existence as part of online history aside, the GIGA Chad is so strong that no doubt his abs could withstand the firepower of any conventional weapon. Realizing that even if it could reach him, it couldn't even scratch the GIGA Chad, SCP-096 would undoubtedly begin a downward spiral. The Shy Guy is a creature so insecure in itself and its appearance that it kills anyone who so much as glances at its face in photos. So being presented with the living embodiment of an idea it could never even hope to attain, the biceps, the perfect right-angled jawline, it's all too much. Sending SCP-096 into a complete meltdown, the creature would be neutralized once and for all by the very existence of the GIGA Chad, resulting in his victory. Okay, so we're 1 point to SCP-096 and 1 to GIGA Chad, and most people would maybe consider leaving it there. But not us. We wanted more than that. You see, we quickly realized that the Anomatron's second scenario was based on a lot of earlier iterations of the GIGA Chad meme. Don't get us wrong, that version of the Ultimate Man could still easily destroy the Shy Guy. But around March of 2021, the infamous photoshopped images of Ernst Kalimov started to be used in slightly different formats. That's the thing about memes. They're not only immortal, forever logged in the ancient texts of the Wayback Machine and compilation videos here on YouTube, but memes are also adaptable. They can evolve and change, finding new variations as time goes on. As such, the average fan versus average enjoyer meme saw a new use of the GIGA Chad. Before the GIGA Chad, this notion of the ideal ultra-masculine specimen was based on, let's be honest, some pretty outdated ideas about what it means to be a man. After all, it takes more than muscle to be a man. Not every man or masculine-presenting person has to work out until they're built like a brick wall. Perhaps the real measure of a man is how sincere, sensitive, and supportive you can be, as well as standing by your interests rather than caving to old societal standards of masculinity. And after we updated our data, the Anomatron 6000 was able to give us a new revised outcome, or what we like to call Scenario 3, the average SCP-096 enjoyer. In this projection, the GIGA Chad's true strength isn't just his masculine physique and his unattainable standards. Instead, it's, in part, the inherent adaptability of his status as a meme, but also his compassion. Just like before, he's more than able to resist SCP-096's attacks, and the creature's insecurity comes out, put on full display when presented with GIGA Chad's sharp jawline. But rather than overcome his anomalous adversary by fighting him, this scenario sees the GIGA Chad comforting the Shy Guy. Through calm empathy and words of affirmation, he reminds SCP-096 that true acceptance of oneself comes from within, and that message strikes a chord with the creature. In a turn of events none of us saw coming, the GIGA Chad offers to help SCP-096 overcome his crippling and deadly sense of insecurity. The pair start using the on-site gym together, after hours when there aren't any innocent Foundation personnel around. There, GIGA Chad not only offers to introduce SCP-096 to an exercise regimen, if that's what the creature wants, but also helps the Shy Guy work on his confidence. They form a friendship, with SCP-096 taking a liking to working out,
Not because it wants to be buff like its new friend, the Giga Chad, but more so because doing so makes it feel more comfortable in its own skin. SCP-096 gradually starts to like itself more, even eating healthier thanks to Giga Chad's advice. Eventually, the Shy Guy begins looking far more content and even starts to develop self-confidence. It's not often that a story involving SCP-096 exists with the creature getting to achieve some semblance of happiness. Well, there is one that comes to mind. The very same Shy Guy story that sent us on this particular streak of pitting it against the Giga Chad in the first place. But what if we put them together? Would coming across a refined SCP-096 spell the end for the Giga Chad? Or would the muscular masculine meme undo the Shy Guy's previous happy ending? Well, according to the Anomatron 6000, neither. When we last left him, after being turned into a handsome 9-foot-tall man, SCP-096 had just started going by the name David. SCP-978, the desired camera, had been used to photograph the refined Shy Guy. It showed him holding hands with the Foundation scientist responsible for his transformation, who had studied the new and improved SCP-096 in great detail. She had quite the understanding of him, but perhaps the photograph from the desired camera was more of a metaphor, and what SCP-096, or David, really desired wasn't specifically the researcher who'd studied him, but a partner who understood him, someone to call an equal. Enter the Giga Chad. According to the calculations made by the Anomatron, the embodiment of ultimate masculinity, both strong and sensitive, came bursting into the Foundation facility. There, the moment he and David saw each other was like the meeting of an unstoppable force and an immovable object. Neither one rushed to solve the encounter with violence. Both the Giga Chad and SCP-096 appreciated each other's aesthetic appeal. Both were remarkably handsome, and one couldn't bear the thought of ridding the world of the other. Instead, it was love at first sight. Both David, formerly known as SCP-096, and the Giga Chad fell head over heels in love with each other, and looking at both, it was not hard to see why. They were a pair of fine, perfectly chiseled fellas, and they instantly hit it off. The newly established couple enjoyed each other's company, spending time in deep conversations, SCP-096 introducing his new partner to his friends at the Foundation, while Giga Chad was comfortable with his own masculinity to express his feelings towards David without fear or judgment. No relationship is perfect, of course. For a short time, a sliver of David's old self re-emerged. The Shy Guy in him worried that perhaps his relationship with the Giga Chad was based purely on both of their extreme good looks, and was nothing more than superficial. But by being an embodiment of healthy, idealized masculinity, the Giga Chad was able to sense something was wrong with David, and rather do the insecure thing of letting it fester, he addressed it directly, and they discussed the issue in a healthy, mature, and constructive way. Not just so they could put SCP-096's worry to rest, but so that both of them could further strengthen their relationship and grow as people. And of course, Giga Chad wasn't just attracted to SCP-096's refined good looks. Far from being superficial, he recognized that David was a complete person, beautiful both inside and out, and loved him as a whole, not just because they were both conventionally attractive on the surface. SCP-096 and the Giga Chad stayed together for the rest of their lives, or as we decided to name this fourth scenario from the Anomatron, happily ever after. Well, hello there, SCP fans. Let's get this out of the way first. You've seen the title and thumbnail, and you're probably wondering, wait, is Siren Head an SCP? And the answer is no. Siren Head is not an SCP. It's a freaky internet monster created by renowned Canadian horror artist Trevor Henderson. Your next question is probably, what's with this crazy-looking server bank behind me? Allow me to introduce you to the Anomatron 6000, the latest advancement of supercomputing owned and operated exclusively by the SCP Foundation. It's capable of a whole bunch of interesting features, calculating ideal containment methods, running state-of-the-art Foundation web crawler software, making and editing fun SCP YouTube videos. But the most interesting feature that the Anomatron has to offer is running hyper-advanced simulations regarding all things anomalous, with data fed into it by thousands of real-life experiments conducted by the SCP Foundation.
It's going to save countless dollars and lives for Foundation researchers. But way more importantly, it's going to let us explore all kinds of weird and wacky what-if scenarios that would never happen organically. Could SCP-343 beat Goku or Superman? Who's a deadlier supernatural killer? SCP-106 or Freddy Krueger? Would the world simply explode from adorableness if SCP-999 and Baby Yoda ever crossed those multiversal barriers and met? We can explore all of these questions, along with any others you may have down in the comments. Seriously, comment it, we dare you. But to get things started, we figured we'd make the Anomatron pit the Foundation's lankiest nightmare monster, SCP-096, against the internet's, Trevor Henderson's, Siren Head. Sorry, Slenderman, you're just not cool anymore. So without further ado, let's kick the Anomatron into gear and see how this wild battle plays out. It's time for SCP-096 vs. Siren Head. Ricky and Elliot, a pair of aspiring travel YouTubers from California, were taking a vacation to the Pacific Northwest to spend some time in the area's beautiful lush forests. However, while the duo were both big fans of travel for its own sake, they weren't just here for the trees and fresh air. You see, despite their jet-setting lifestyle, Ricky and Elliot's subscribers and views hadn't exactly been phenomenal lately. Turns out hiking vlogs and GoPro footage of the two of them jumping into absurdly blue water in Bali weren't exactly that interesting to people who weren't actually there. But Ricky had formulated an ingenious plan to pull the two of them out of obscurity. They would hunt down and film real footage of the legendary Siren Head, a supernatural monster said to haunt forests and isolated graveyards. There were plenty of fakers out there on YouTube, but if the two of them could get real footage of Siren Head, and also preferably survive the experience, they'd be framing their golden play buttons in no time. But they were already encountering certain issues. For starters, the two Californians had severely underestimated just how cold it was in the Pacific Northwest, and as such, were already shivering from bone-deep cold. The second issue was food. While the two of them had thought ahead and brought a selection of tasty protein bars, they'd also gotten hungry during the early hours of their walk and eaten all of them, leaving them feeling severely out of luck by the time dinner rolled around. And the third and perhaps most problematic issue of all was the fact that Ricky and Elliot didn't exactly have a great sense of direction. During all of their previous trips, they'd been on guided tours with local experts. In this instance, wanting to take all the Siren Head glory and clout for themselves, they decided to come in alone, with the incredibly janky Google Maps app to guide them. As such, as the night was creeping in, the two aspiring YouTube celebrities had no idea where they were. Needless to say, it wasn't exactly an ideal situation. And to make matters worse, Ricky and Elliot had been experiencing some strange feelings for the last couple of hours when they'd gotten particularly deep into the forest. That dread-inducing sensation of being watched by something lurking just out of sight, a gaze with some unknowable and darkly malicious intent boiling behind it. These two poor saps had no idea what was in store for them tonight. And wouldn't you know it, the one watching them right now wouldn't even be the only monster after them. After an expectable amount of bumbling and buffoonery, Ricky and Elliot managed to gather up enough tinder to make a semi-respectable campfire. They could sleep out here tonight, then set off in search of Siren Head or civilization, whichever came first, in the daylight the next day. The duo did what they could to remain chipper in spite of the ominous circumstances. Sure, they were trapped in the depths of the woods alone, but think of the amazing vlog footage they'd get. They'd be like the next Blair Witch crew, except they'd live, hopefully. But as the duo sat next to their campfire, they felt that ominous sensation again. The hairs on the back of their necks started standing up. They felt shivers that didn't just come from the cold. More and more they started to feel certain that something in this forest was watching them, something ancient and powerful and evil. That's when they heard the telltale crackle of radio static, and their skeletons almost jumped out of their skin. Could it be him? The patron saint of gone missing without a trace, of creeping dread, of bad things coming. Siren Head himself. Both men fell silent. All they could hear was the crackling of their own fire. Had the sound before just been an illusion? A product of a pair of paranoid minds also predisposed to sense siren-headed monsters lurking amongst the trees. They'd been reading about a higher rate of disappearances in this area, along with a number of frightening sightings of tall, thin beings and radio static that seemed perfectly consistent with Siren Head activity. That's why they'd come here in the first place. But had they come here to their deaths? The two needed to distract themselves, or they'd go mad from the paranoia. They decided to share a few fun little anecdotes of the travels they'd had before meeting one another, showing the photos they'd saved on their smartphones. Ricky had been to Hawaii, Tahiti, Bora Bora, Fiji, St. Lucia, and the Maldives. Clearly, he liked his vacations warm and sandy. Elliot, on the other hand, tended to like his trips to be a little more adventurous. He'd seen volcanoes, waterfalls, deep and treacherous cave systems, and, of course, a little guided mountaineering. One photo that Elliot showed Ricky was particularly breathtaking. He was standing in the foreground of a snowy landscape, with an incredible mountain range behind him. When Ricky asked Elliot where exactly he'd taken this picture, strangely enough, he drew a complete blank. Maybe somewhere in Canada or Siberia or something like that. But it was a hell of a trip, whatever the case. He remembered having a great time. It was such a tiny detail, but when looking at the photo, Ricky couldn't help but notice something in the background, a speck of white. Sure, not exactly newsworthy in the snowy mountain range, but this wasn't snow. It was a speck of white that seemed to be a slightly different shade than the rest of the mountain. Strange. Perhaps it was just some tiny particle stuck on the lens whenever the photo was taken. The two continued to chat and warmed their hands against the fire, having no idea of the horror they'd just awoken in doing so. Over 100 miles away, at an SCP Foundation containment site, researchers and guards walked around the perimeter of a huge airtight metal cube, reading off diagnostics and audio recordings. For reasons that should be obvious to everyone who's a fan of this channel, there were no camera feeds coming from the inside of the great metal cube, only a faint whimpering sound, like a sad, wounded animal, and the clanking of pacing feet moving back and forth over the metal, dragging forlorn knuckles. It turned every head in the room when the crying started to get louder. Soon it wasn't just quiet weeping, it was a series of horrendous, slobbering sobs, wails of pure pain and despair. Someone in the room screamed, "Close your eyes and hit the deck!" Knowing exactly what had happened. They learned well enough from the infamous Incident 096-1-A containment breach that there was no way of stopping this thing until it run its course. The best they could do was minimize their own fatalities in the process. Everyone in the room did as they were told, hitting the ground, closing their eyes, and covering them with their hands just to be safe. That's when the solid steel of the cube was torn open like crepe paper, and the howling, raging SCP-096 broke free, galloping on all fours through the nearest wall, shattering it, and spraying debris everywhere. As mobile task forces were dispatched to track the rampaging abomination and try their best to clear the path ahead as it sought out its target, one thought was going through the minds of everyone in the room. Woe betide the poor fools who saw that monster's face. Back in the deep dark forests of the Pacific Northwest, the presence of some unnerving force was becoming far harder to deny for Ricky and Elliot. They heard the sounds of garbled voices out in the woods, the squeals and crackles of radio static. They saw shapes moving amongst the trees, tall and thin, like long, spindly limbs. While neither wanted to voice their fear, they were both thinking similar things. If there really was a monster out here, why hadn't it killed them? It had all the time in the world to do it. But that was just it, wasn't it? It had all the time in the world, so why rush? It had every advantage. It could take its time and do this exactly how it wanted to. Ricky and Elliot had made themselves the perfect prey, and as they saw a huge, lithe figure suddenly separate itself from the trees, they began to wonder if it was really worth it to risk both of their lives for YouTube clout. Either way, it was now probably too late for regrets. Ricky and Elliot's jaws fell in horror as the monster emerged from the darkness before them. They recognized the awful, mottled skin stretched over the monster's 40-foot frame. They saw the grasping hands, and up above, the nightmarish faceless head split into a pair of sirens pointing in different directions, each one filled with gnashing teeth and slithering tongues. It was even more terrifying than they could possibly have imagined. Siren Head speakers crackled into life and hissed out,
9, 18, 1, child, 17, remove, vial.
Ricky and Elliot stumbled backwards as Siren Head advanced, its speakers still bleeding hateful static. Neither could move or speak, only watch as its long, gnarled fingers reached from the dark to grasp them. There was a terrible pained wail in the woods after that, but it wasn't coming from Ricky, Elliot, or Siren Head. It was distant at first, but soon became louder and louder as the force's point of origin came barreling towards them. Even Siren Head couldn't help but turn to see SCP-096, a flash of terrible white fury, come charging towards them in the dark, knocking down all the trees in its path. Leaves and pine needles scattered, trunks exploded into splinters. Nothing would stop the Shy Guy from claiming its prey. Nothing would stop it from destroying Ricky. And now as it approached, Elliot made the fatal mistake of looking at its face, too. 096 lunged, ready to go in for the kill when Siren Head's hands closed around the Shy Guy's slender torso. In one fluid motion with surprising strength for its scrawny build, it hurled the Shy Guy into the distance, smashing another several trees in its path. The words,
My prey, mine.
hissed out of its speakers. But 096 was only down for mere moments. It sprung back up on its hind and forelegs and started galloping towards Ricky and Elliot again, who were still frozen in place. This time, just before the Shy Guy's terrible claws could close around the two hapless wannabe YouTubers, down came Siren Head's clenched fist, pounding 096's head into the dirt. Overhead, mobile task force helicopters circled, wearing their scramble goggles and trying to get a visual on the situation unfolding below. They could hardly believe what they were seeing down there. Was some other unclassified anomaly managing to intercept 096 in its rage state? Only a handful of anomalies on record have ever been shown of being capable of such a feat. It seemed that they were dealing with something serious here. Down below, the battle continued. Siren Head had a unique advantage over most other combatants facing SCP-096. It was an extra-dimensional being with no eyes, merely an innate psychic awareness of its victims around it. Not unlike how SCP-096 detect people seeing its face in photographs or videos, without need for any kind of direct contact. As such, it was impossible for Siren Head to see the Shy Guy's face, and thus impossible for the Shy Guy to ever actually direct its aggression against it. Whether or not 096 would kill steal Siren Head's intended prey was another matter entirely. In the night's first minor miracle, Ricky and Elliot remembered that they'd been born with working legs and decided that right now would be an excellent time to use them. They turned and began to run while Siren Head continued beating the Shy Guy into the dirt, sprinting with all their might. However, the growing distance between them only aggravated the Shy Guy further. It sprang out from the dirt with unstoppable force and broke away from Siren Head's grip. The Shy Guy never wasted time, ever. It always made a beeline for its intended victim with one directive in mind: total annihilation. Tonight is no different. Ricky and Elliot screamed as they heard its pounding gallop on the ground behind them. Closer, closer, closer. Then suddenly, defying all spatial reasoning, Siren Head emerged out from the darkness between Ricky, Elliot, and 096. Being 40 feet tall, Siren Head dwarfed even the Shy Guy. It lunged and grabbed the wailing white monstrosity, holding it as one would a particularly vicious cat, and trying to keep it in place. Siren Head wanted to crush the monster's bones and carry on stalking its feeble human prey, who were currently in the process of getting away, but somehow that was impossible. It was almost like the monster had an indestructible skeleton. Up above, the mobile task forces continued observing this clash of the Titans from their two helicopters. Seeing how Siren Head was somehow doing a serviceable job of subduing the Shy Guy, one of the task force members joked, "Maybe we should hire this guy." Another chimed in, "I don't think we have any ballistic vests in his size." The laughter soon turned to screams when Siren Head hurled 096's flailing body up at one of the helicopters with incredible force, knocking it out of the sky. It careened down to the ground, a ball of fear and violence before exploding. Anyone who survived the initial blast was unlucky enough to have seen the Shy Guy's face. Their screams rang out briefly before being abruptly silenced by the monster. Helicopter Alpha had no survivors. Meanwhile, Ricky and Elliot had kept running until their lungs burned and their muscles pumped thumbtacks. Seeing that the chaos was so far behind them now, they took a moment to stop and breathe, recomposing themselves. In the second minor miracle of the night, it looked like the two of them had actually survived this ordeal. Those two horrific monsters had canceled each other out. but Ricky and Elliot were about to learn a harsh lesson. They really weren't that lucky. The last thing the two of them ever saw was Siren Head emerging from the darkness once more. The last thing they ever felt was the monster's terrible gnarled fingers curling around their bodies, too fast for them to escape. And the last thing they ever heard was each other's screams, followed by a sickeningly meaty crunch. Elsewhere in the forest, SCP-096's wails died down to its usual maudlin sob. The rage state had ended. All of its targets had been destroyed. It just hadn't been the one to do all of the destroying, per se. Not long after that, Helicopter Bravo descended safely, and the remaining MTF members closed around the blubbering beast. Someone blackbagged it, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that was at least one monster taken care of tonight. "What about the other one?" the MTF lieutenant asked. The team's commander shook his head and said, "Let's worry about that freak later and get 096 back to containment. This place gives me the creeps."
Somehow, most likely through some nefarious means, a fateful postcard has been sent to one of the residents of the murky, mysterious Araniram Island. Living on this particular island was already a strange and scary enough existence, given the horrors the inhabitants of Anariram share their home with. But perhaps the only thing just as horrible as life on that island was being sent a postcard. Sure, that doesn't sound all that horrible. Postcards are usually used to show a corner of the world far away and extend well wishes from friends or relatives on vacations. But ordinarily, postcards don't depict a photo of SCP-096 with the words, "Wish he was there," scrawled on the other side. From its containment cell at the SCP Foundation, the Shy Guy instantly sensed that somebody, somewhere, had seen a picture of its face. Breaking down into an enraged fit of homicidal insecurity, SCP-096 immediately broke from its containment chamber and made a cross-country beeline, heading straight for Araniram at anomalously accelerated speeds. Little did the creature or the Foundation know that the Shy Guy was being led straight into a trap, and the poor island resident who had received the chilling postcard, well, they were unlucky enough to be the bait. While the SCP Foundation started frantically trying to track down where it had gone, the Shy Guy had already made its way to a wooden cabin belonging to the unfortunate postcard recipient. Emerging from the now emptied home once the owner was no more, SCP-096 would have returned to his cell just as quickly as he left. That is, if he wasn't the only monstrous creature on the island. A loud and sudden noise caught the creature's attention. The sound of an old steam train whistle. It rang out once more, from somewhere off in the distance, but there was so much thick fog hanging in the air around Araniram that it was almost impossible to see anything, especially with how dark it was. The second time the whistle sounded, it was closer, but there was another sound too, and not the loud chugging of a steam engine that you would expect. It was an erratic, heavy thudding. The noise of lots of somethings drumming against the ground, causing the earth itself to shudder. Legs. They were the steps of multiple huge legs, crawling across the surface of the island, heading straight towards SCP-096. A third piercing whistle rang out, even closer still. This time, the orange glow of a light could be seen, dulled by the surrounding fog, but getting brighter and clearer as it came closer. The light was casting shadows against the dark fog, long, spindly shapes of spidery appendages, until before the Shy Guy's eyes, a creature of pure nightmares came bursting out of the fog. It was a monstrous sight, even to SCP-096. Its body was the red front engine of an old-fashioned steam train, hoisted off the ground by 4 pairs of enormous black, spindly, spider-like legs that propelled the beast forwards at a terrifying speed. Able to move without the limitations of needing to follow a railroad track, the monster was barreling towards SCP-096 with a twisted smile on its grotesque face. At the front of the locomotive was its circular face, with its unnaturally white eyes and a mouth that sported rows of razor-sharp teeth, all covered in blood. This hellish abomination, a being that was part steam engine and part giant spider, was the terror of Araniram himself, the carnivorous CHOO Charles.
Seeing Charles racing towards them on its 8 spider legs would be enough to make anyone freeze up and stop in their tracks out of sheer terror, and SCP-096 was compelled to do the same. Except the terrifying train creature's pale eyes were looking directly at the Shy Guy. As Charles sized the anomaly up as its next meal, he was looking at it, and that meant SCP-096 had to kill him. The question was, how could it? How could the skinny, spindly humanoid hope to even fight something like CHOO Charles? He was much bigger, even more fearsome. But as quick as Charles could move on his spidery legs, he was not faster than SCP-096. In the blink of an eye, the Shy Guy raced off shrieking and sobbing in despair, leaving Charles to continue roaming his island territory in search of other human inhabitants to terrorize. SCP-096 had retreated to some nearby woods, quick enough to move out of Charles's path somewhere it could hide, for now. But the Shy Guy could feel a familiar, painful feeling, almost pulling him back towards CHOO Charles, right back into harm's way. SCP-096 possessed an inescapable compulsion to kill anyone who looked at its face, and that seemed to include horrifying part train, part spider hybrids. It was a fact of the Shy Guy's very existence. He had to go after whoever looked at him and make them pay. In fact, it took all the creature's own strength not to instantly rush back over to Charles to try. SCP-096 knew that if it did, then there was little chance it would survive coming face to face with the terror of Aranirum. However, while it was watching CHOO Charles from a safe distance, seeing him crawl across the landscape on his multiple legs, that SCP-096 noticed something. It was another light obscured by the fog, but this one was much higher up. One could almost mistake it for the moon, if it wasn't getting closer, all the while accompanied by the sound of whirring rotors. While the Shy Guy had been evading CHOO Charles, the SCP Foundation had been tirelessly trying to track down its location, and now they'd found their runaway anomaly here on Aranirum Island. As the chopper carrying the mobile task force drew nearer, the tyrannical train turned and took notice. To SCP-096, the Foundation's arrival could have meant a way home and away from the spidery steam engine. But to Charles, the approaching chopper meant only one thing: a new source of food.
Captain!
One of the MTF troops aboard the chopper called over his headset.
What is it? Do we have eyes on SCP-096?
The captain replied before realizing what he'd said.
Well, not eyes on, because then it would have jumped up onto the chopper and killed us all. I mean, is there any sign of SCP-096 on the island? Negative, sir, although you should probably see this,
the soldier replied. Begrudgingly, the captain unbuckled himself from his seat and snatched the Foundation operative's binoculars, using them to look down at Aranirum below. It didn't take him long to spot the massive, multi-legged monstrosity that was CHOO Charles, who had fallen still, waiting for the chopper to descend low enough for him to reach.
Good gravy, what on earth is that thing?
The captain exclaimed, before taking another look through the binoculars.
Is that? Wait, what is an instance of SCP-2086 doing out here?
SCP-2086 was an infamous anomalous species the Foundation had encountered before. Much like Charles, they were anthropod-like creatures with multiple long legs that protruded from a body resembling a man-made mode of transport. However, SCP-2086s usually took on the appearance of buses while in vehicle form.
Sir, I don't think that's an SCP-2086,
the lookout replied.
To me, it looks more like an instance of SCP-3023. Impossible, all the way out here?
The captain retorted.
We're nowhere near the region where the anomaly occurs. It could have scurried its way from Germany and taken nest here, sir,
the trooper responded. Yet another anomaly that CHOO Charles bore a striking resemblance to. SCP-3023 was a rare phenomenon that was known to occur at random, but was limited to a specific area of central Germany. The effect of this phenomenon caused ordinary, everyday, inanimate objects of any shape or size to suddenly turn into aggressive spiders, sporting 8 legs that grew from whatever was affected by SCP-3023. Perhaps CHOO Charles was indeed an instance of SCP-3023, or some distant evolutionary offshoot of SCP-2086. It was hard to say for sure. The only thing for sure was that Charles was a man-eating beast, more so than an insidious villain. And being so highly territorial, he considered the entire island of Aranirum to be his natural habitat, and his hunting ground. Anything that arrived in his vicinity was prey to the terrifying train, and his ravenous craving for human flesh meant he was ready to attack the descending SCP Foundation chopper.
All right, let's go, go, go!
The MTF captain called to his troops, signaling them to start rappelling out of the helicopter and down to the island.
Keep your scramble goggles on max, we still need to recapture 096. But first priority is taking down this big ugly beast.
Wearing goggles specifically designed to distort the Shy Guy from their view, the team began abseiling out of the aircraft. But CHOO Charles was already waiting for them. Rearing back on its 4 back legs, the nightmarish train spider swiped at the descending MTF operatives. What first seemed like an instinctive, uncoordinated assault quickly became precise and relentless strikes as Charles sliced through some of the cables the MTF troops were using to rappel down. Their lifeline cut, the unlucky Foundation operatives plummeted from mid-air, right down towards where the terror of Aranerum was waiting for them to fall. A few of the MTFs made it to the ground alive, and immediately began retaliating against CHOO Charles. The gunfire from their weapons flickered all around the carnivorous creature, but their bullets could barely chip the red paintwork on his steam-train body. Dashing towards his helpless human prey on his many legs, Charles began to feast. Then suddenly, something started pulling at one of his huge spider legs, pulling Charles back moments before he had a chance to claim his latest victim, the captain of the Foundation's MTF. It was SCP-096, having zipped out of hiding and shrieking wildly as it used all of its strength to wrench one of CHOO Charles's multiple limbs. Angered that it couldn't reach the MTF captain, the part spider, part train hybrid stomped the leg that was being pulled in a successful attempt to free itself from the Shy Guy's grip. But in the same instant, SCP-096 used its anomalous speed to reappear in front of the already angered locomotive monster. With his railroad rage about to reach its breaking point, Charles entered into a relentless rampage, making quick work of the leftover MTF troops before setting his sights squarely on SCP-096. But doing that was his biggest mistake. Now CHOO Charles had seen the Shy Guy twice, and to the insecure anomaly, that meant Charles had to go. Traveling faster than even the multi-legged monstrosity could perceive, SCP-096 began racing towards CHOO Charles's many legs. The Shy Guy had realized that it didn't stand a chance of dealing with the terror of Aranerum the same way it handled all the others that had seen its face. So instead, it had settled on a new approach, specifically tailored to taking down the spider-legged steam engine. One by one, SCP-096 started knocking Charles's many legs out from underneath him, effectively tripping him up over and over again. The Shy Guy moved so quick that the cumbersome Charles could barely react in time, having one leg after the other knocked out from beneath him, causing him to tumble to the ground. Normally, CHOO Charles was smart enough to retreat if he encountered something that could fight back. If he was injured badly enough, the spider-like creature would scuttle out of harm's way in order to heal his wounds. But the rage at being constantly tripped up by SCP-096 was distracting Charles from the Shy Guy's true ploy. With every leg it knocked out from underneath the spidery steam train, SCP-096 had been gradually directing Charles towards a nearby gorge. With a terrifying burst of anomalous speed, the Shy Guy caused CHOO Charles to topple over sideways, rolling over himself until he landed upside down in the bottom of the rocky gorge. The multi-legged locomotive monster's spindly legs flailed desperately as he tried to reposition himself, but with no luck. SCP-096 had managed what first seemed to be impossible and beaten the terror of Aranerum, CHOO Charles. Or, for now, at least. A group of well-armed Mobile Task Force members entered the containment chamber, armed to the teeth. Some faced the ground, droplets of sweat dripping onto their visors. Some wore Dr. Dan's infamous scramble goggles, and one particularly brave member of personnel wielded only a bag. The room they were currently standing in was perhaps the most dangerous place in the world. Why? Because it contained two terrifying titans of the anomalous world, SCP-682, the infinitely hateful, hard-to-destroy reptile, and SCP-096, the Shy Guy, the ultimate mindless killing machine. And if the very idea of having them in the same place doesn't feel risky enough, the deadly duo had just spent 27 hours in one of the most brutal brawls imaginable. And incidentally, fights like this are exactly why we're here today. We cover a lot of SCPs on this channel, and we've seen the way some of the most dangerous anomalies out there can tear their way through civilians and trained Foundation MTF operatives with ease. But how do they fare against monsters, maniacs, and reality benders their own size? With the help of the SCP Explained audience, we're going to explore theoretical fights between some of the anomalous world's biggest badasses. And who better to get this show on the road than two of the most iconic and deadly monsters that haunt the halls of a Foundation containment site near you. The hard-to-destroy reptile and the Shy Guy are household names for anyone familiar with the SCP Foundation. And before we get into the gruesome results of their first fight, and your theories about how a potential rematch might play out, let's get to know the combat prowess of this pair of nasty customers. What kind of damage are they capable of taking and inflicting? Spoiler alert, it's a hell of a lot. In this corner, we have SCP-682, a monster whose ability to survive seemingly anything is only equaled by its terrible attitude towards pretty much everyone and everything around it. Though, to be fair, you'd probably be a little grumpy too if the SCP Foundation was constantly trying to murder you in different ways, rather than just keeping you contained. 682's basic offensive power set involves impressive strength, speed, intelligence, and the aid of its deadly fangs, claws, and tail. However, 682 is considerably stronger after it's just survived and regenerated from a termination attempt. That's because the true combat asset of 682 is and always has been its adaptability. Specifically, if some kind of attack brings 682 into a state of near death, but doesn't finish the job, 682 will generally either develop a perfect defense or counteroffensive for that attack or somehow add a version of the attack to its own arsenal. This has ranged from super pressurized jets of its own blood, dangerously radioactive banana beams firing out of its mouth, and even an incapacitating laughter blast gained from an encounter with the adorable SCP-099. It is an absolute Swiss Army knife of dangerous anomalous powers and abilities. And if you need any further proof of that, check out our multiple videos on all the ludicrous failed attempts to kill this nightmare lizard. And in this corner, we've got SCP-096, the Shy Guy. While 682 is freakishly adaptable, in most situations SCP-096 is pretty much unstoppable. This long, gangly creep will murder anyone who sees even the tiniest glimpse of its face, with such ferocity that not even a trace of the body will remain. It does this by entering what many call its rage state, activated by the sudden immense distress of its face being seen. When it enters this state, the SCP Foundation has only one prerogative: get themselves and anyone else out of its way, because you will not stop this thing until it's killed its target. All the SCP Foundation has ever been able to do is wait until after the target has been obliterated, and then come in to bag its head when it enters its docile state. Almost nothing else has even successfully slowed it down. While they have been capable of damaging its flesh, the monster's skeleton seems to be utterly indestructible, and its damaged flesh has proven consistently able to grow back. The monster seems to be immune to everything from pain to cold, and moves at such a speed that it's pretty much impossible to escape for long. So when you factor in an indestructible body, immense strength, immense speed, and an unstoppable urge to kill anyone who sees its face, you're looking at a formidable opponent. It's only natural that the Foundation would want to use 096 in their 682 cross tests. So what exactly happened when the Mobile Task Force entered the room after this first epic battle? What did they find inside the chamber in the grisly aftermath? SCP-096 lay crumpled in the corner, wheezing, scared, covered in its own blood. 682 was barely recognizable. 096 had reduced it to a quarter of its original size, the rest having been utterly torn to shreds. Both had narrowly survived the encounter, but it was an epic battle neither of them would ever forget. Though this was especially true for SCP-096. You see, as we alluded to earlier, SCP-682 is used to taking a kicking at this point. It hasn't ever truly been killed, but it's been beaten, eaten, burned, zapped, and smashed within an inch of its life more times than you can count. 096, on the other hand, was not used to not being able to utterly eliminate its prey. While it is impossible to speculate what's going on inside SCP-096's mind, all evidence points towards getting a draw in this battle, seriously damaging SCP-096's confidence. Now, every time Foundation personnel tries to bring 096 into 682's containment chamber, he begins crying and scratching at his own face. Why? Is he scared of 682? Is he humiliated? thinking of the fight he wasn't able to win? Or is the very idea of someone seeing his face and him not being able to immediately kill them just too unbearably stressful? Seeing as the Shy Guy's mouth is only good for two things and neither of them are for talking, we'll never truly know. But either way, it's clear that 096 has no interest in a rematch. But what if that changed? What if 096 realized that it was wasting its potential? It managed to get SCP-682 3/4 of the way to death last time. What could stop it from getting that last quarter? Sure, nothing has ever killed SCP-682 before, but there's a first time for everything, right? Maybe 096 would have a Rocky-style training montage where he rebuilds his confidence and becomes the underdog he was always meant to be. He'd walk right up to that big nasty reptile and give him the rematch of the century. What would happen then? Now we give the floor to you, the loyal viewers of SCP Explained. Here are some of your thoughts, theories, and opinions on a potential historic rematch between these two creeps. Let's get ready to rumble! I really wanted an excuse to say that. Ooh, I really like saying that. Pingu with an axe said, if 682's adaptability is based around his ability to develop countermeasures to any damage inflicted, or in the case of 173, a countermeasure to the cause of said damage, I imagine 682 would turn his skin entirely reflective, causing 096 to see his own face and the feedback loop would break his mind. Interesting. Whether this would work is all dependent on whether SCP-096 can actually see, or if it is merely capable of psychically intuiting when someone else sees its face. If the latter is true, then this particular adaptation wouldn't do much good for SCP-682. Random user said if this is after their first cross-test and they were forced to interact again, they wouldn't attempt to fight each other. I feel like they'd form a truce and take out the researchers on site. Yeah, this would be one of the worst-case scenarios. Whether even the SCP Foundation could handle a simultaneous 682 and 096 breach without bringing in Hammerdown is an open question. Ramon Vonkin said, simple, after the first encounter when 096 stopped attacking 682, 682 will grow eyes that filter out 096's face the next time. Organic scramble goggles. Dr. Dan would be fuming with jealousy. Coop Sater said, I really want SCP-096 to win, so I'm sending him a blind personal trainer so he can beat the snot out of SCP-682. This is exactly the kind of help SCP-096 needs. He's got the rage, endurance, and strength. With a little help getting his form and technique in order, he'd be an even more formidable opponent. Kyoto Ryo said, I'd like to imagine 096, after playing with 682 for so long, would try to eat 682 in a vain attempt to kill it, only to gain 682's abilities and vice versa. Either of these options would be horrifying. SCP-096 with 682's abilities or 682 with 096's abilities would likely be a truly perfect killing machine. That's terrifying. Autumn said, what if they just shared a nice cold drink while playing Mario Kart? I'm sure 096 would be the white Shy Guy character in every race. Personally, we love this idea, and we think 682 would go for Bowser. I personally go for Luigi. Ibrahim Timur said, 682 would win eventually. It's way more intelligent, adaptive, and overall malicious, while 096 acts just on instinct. This is undeniably a good point. What 682 lacks in sheer savagery, it makes up for in its ruthless calculating intelligence. Could this give it the edge over 096? Monomoy Mukherjee said, that fight would be interesting because both of them now know how they attack and what their attacks are. Nice segue. Due to the relatively mindless nature of 096, as far as we're aware, it's probably unable to learn from experience. 682, however, would have the advantage of knowing how 096 operates in the second battle. Devon Smith said, as much as I'd like to see how this would play out, I imagine 096 can't manage more than other SCPs have in the past. Not to downplay him, but he might need some extra friends to do a whole lot more damage. It's undeniable that going in with tag team partners would better 096's chances of taking the lizard down. However, due to SCP-096's shyness and tendency to kill everyone and everything that looks at him, he doesn't have many friends looking to volunteer. Ninetales said, 096 will cry in the corner while 682 starts attacking it. Eventually, it gets confused that 096 isn't fighting back after an hour and begins to adapt to it and becomes docile forever. Okay, look, while it's unlikely that this would happen, it's certainly nice to imagine, isn't it? Adam Britton said, narratively it needs to conclude with a reason to never try it again. So I'm going to say that 682 will telepathically project the image of 096 into the site staff or the entire human psychospace. Ugh, yikes. This is a possibility so terrifying and honestly plausible that it's making us regret wanting to see this rematch altogether. Chaos Insurgency said, I think 682 would just think, for damn sake, just leave me alone. Given he's been through more termination attempts than SCP-5031 can count on its fingers, who could blame him for getting a little frustrated? Michael Porter said, I think that 682 and 096 would take each other to court for aggravated assault against the other. Either one of them will get sentenced to death and will unsurprisingly not die, or the two team up to kill the entire courtroom and they walk out as a new serial killing team. The real question is what kind of lawyers would represent a pair of murderous, anomalous monsters in court? Better call Saul. Ari Workman said, maybe if we try being nice to them for once, we can offer them a cup of tea and get them both a therapist. 682 will talk all his hate away and then realize his wrongdoing and become an activist. And 096 would become very confident about his face and become a model. There, problem solved. Hey, when people strive towards self-improvement, we're all winners. But we don't know if we can say the same for 682 and 096. Even if this rematch ever did happen, perhaps it'd be just another draw. An unstoppable force against an immovable object. But other matchups may be more clear-cut. What kind of versus battles would you like to see us cover in the future? What SCPs would you really love to see duke it out? Let us know in the comments, and keep an eye out on the community posts in order to throw in your anomalous 2 cents for our next versus battle.
The cultist screamed. The long and spindly but unimaginably powerful arm of the Shy Guy had him by the leg, dragging him backwards, his fingernails carving deep ruts into the floor. His friend was already on the run, but his death warrant had been sealed by a glance. In the history of evil plans, rarely has an evil plan backfired so spectacularly. As the Shy Guy bellowed, destroying its latest prey and galloping after the second, which would soon become the third and the fourth and the fifth and so much more as the personnel of the SCP Foundation caught unplanned glimpses of his terrible face. It would take a god to undo the chaos that was unfolding. The exact same god that these two idiot cultists were here to destroy. The plan had seemed so simple, so perfectly straightforward on paper. Sneak into the SCP Foundation and assassinate SCP-035. That being said, even deluded cultists of the Scarlet King knew that killing the anomaly believed to be God himself was going to be far easier in theory than in practice. And yet, neither one of this intrepid pair of Foundation impersonators could ever have predicted things would go this bad. Several years earlier, Zachary and Cash were nothing more than a pair of social shut-ins trawling forums on the internet from the secluded sanctuary of their basements. In fact, it was on a particular one of these forums that would lead to the pair eventually meeting in person. Parawatch, a deep web online space for discussions of the supernatural. While there was nothing inherently insidious about Parawatch itself, it did draw in those who were interested in the paranormal and even the anomalous, like Zach and Cash. And that made the forum the perfect recruitment tool for those whose intentions were far more nefarious. Both men were individually approached by another user, who was only known by his screen name, COTSK. Over some lengthy conversations with this mysterious third party, both Zach and Cash found themselves being convinced into believing the core tenets of a murderous cult that revered a conceptual deity, the children of the Scarlet King. And it was during a secret gathering of their fellow members that Cash and Zach would not only meet, but find themselves specifically tasked with a mission that was meant to clear the way for the Scarlet King to enter our reality. Simply put, the two of them were tasked with killing God. The plan was devised by one of the longer-standing children of the Scarlet King, who divulged their cult's knowledge of the SCP Foundation, specifically an entity known as SCP-035, a powerful reality warper who had claimed to be the architect of the very universe itself. In the eyes of the Scarlet King's followers,
This meant that SCP-343 could pose a direct threat to the ascension of their destructive deity. If the Scarlet King was ever to gain access to this universe, there was a high chance SCP-343 could oppose him. So, with stolen credentials and Foundation personnel garb, Zack and Cash were sent in to remove SCP-343 from the equation. It goes without saying that killing a being believed to be God himself was hardly an easy goal to achieve. Nobody could just poison SCP-343, or take him out using conventional weapons, or even use any other typical methods of assassination that would work on a human target. Instead, Zack and Cash needed to get creative. Luckily, there was another anomaly kept contained by the SCP Foundation that the Children of the Scarlet King had thought would be perfect for the job. It was a miniature event horizon, a black sphere that could pull any nearby matter into itself. Anything brought within the vicinity of this anomalous wormhole would quickly be sucked in and ultimately lost forever with no chance of retrieval. Sure, it might not kill SCP-343 strictly speaking, but it could certainly remove him from play, leaving the universe unprotected against the rise of the Scarlet King. However, there was one tiny problem. One otherwise minute detail that, because it went uncorrected, jeopardized the whole plan. It could have been down to inaccurate information that the Children of the Scarlet King had on the SCP Foundation. After all, the organization was known for keeping its operations and even its very existence a closely guarded secret. Or perhaps, sheerly due to human error, the wrong number was said by the wrong cultist at the wrong moment, misheard or misread, leading to a 4 being replaced with a 6. You see, the miniature event horizon was designated as SCP-094, but by mistake, Zack and Cash had slipped undetected into the Foundation in search of SCP-096, unaware that anomaly was far from what they were expecting. The look of terror on Zack's face appeared instantly as the pair of Scarlet King fanatics opened the door to the containment cell. That same horrified look had vanished just as quickly the second that SCP-096 took notice of the 2 new visitors. In the blink of an eye, the abnormally proportioned humanoid anomaly had gone from being hunched over in a corner, gently rocking itself, to standing directly in front of Zack and Cash, towering over them both and screeching incoherently. Cash turned and ran, abandoning his cultist compatriot as Zack screamed in fear. The shy guy had grabbed him. A moment later, his screams had been silenced thanks to SCP-096. Cash had no idea what the creature was. All he knew was it certainly wasn't the miniaturized black hole he and Zack had been sent to find, but he tried to keep the original goal in mind, even in a moment of crisis. Take out SCP-343 so that the Scarlet King could rise. Maybe this other anomaly, whatever it was, could stand a chance against the reality warper. Cash would never get to find out, however, as he was tackled to the ground by a Foundation security team as he turned the corner. But SCP-096 had been hot on the cultist's heels and had appeared behind him just as he was being restrained by security officers. And the whole unit could see the shy guy now, which meant not one of them stood a chance. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the facility, oblivious to the carnage of the unfolding containment breach, SCP-343 was enjoying a stroll around the Foundation site, with a hamburger in one hand and a milkshake in the other. He had spent most of the afternoon the way he usually did, phasing out of reality to an extra-dimensional astral plane outside of our known universe, where he could privately enjoy a game of solitaire using a deck of cards conjured out of nothingness. Upon returning, polishing off the dregs of his lunch, which he also willed into existence from nowhere, SCP-343 barely noticed that the entire Foundation seemed to be on red alert. Or more accurately, he did notice. He just didn't do much to help. You see, one of the more notable things about SCP-343, aside from the fact that he can use his anomalous abilities to do literally anything imaginable, is that he very much enjoys taking a back seat. He claims that after creating the universe, he got tired of having to be in control of everything, everywhere, all at once. Good movie, by the way. And so, while SCP-343 could right every wrong and solve every problem in the entire universe, he chooses not to. all to pursue the illusion of giving up control and leaving the universe to its own devices. That is, unless something tries to harm him directly, and something was very much about to. While the pair of Scarlet King cultists who had accidentally set SCP-096 free were already dead, they'd unknowingly started a chain reaction. The Foundation desperately dispatched more of its personnel to try and recontain the Shy Guy, but the more they sent, the more of them observed the creature. This gave SCP-096 even more targets, extending its rage state as it zipped through the Foundation, killing everyone that had clasped eyes on it. Until that rage-fueled rampage led to coincidentally cross paths with SCP-343, who had just walked through a wall on his way back to his cell, right into the path of SCP-096.
Oh dear me.
SCP-343 sighed, finishing the remainder of his milkshake before making the empty cup and straw disappear.
It's been some time, hasn't it, Ian? My boy, look at what's become of you.
For a moment, SCP-096 seemed to pause, its pale skin flecked with droplets of blood thanks to the sheer number of guards and researchers it had torn through for daring to look at it.
I see you're still having the same old troubles.
The reality warper continued, reacting eerily calmly and casually towards the towering monster.
You know, you really ought to work on your confidence.
That did it. The sentence touched a nerve within the Shy Guy, giving it a pang of sadness that erupted quickly into an unbridled rage. It did not matter that SCP-343 was a powerful anomaly with the ability to do almost anything. He had still looked at SCP-096. In fact, he was looking directly at it, and that meant he had to go. His fate was sealed as the creature began wailing and charging straight for SCP-343. With a casual wave of his hand, God swiped the creature aside, sending SCP-096 flying. Thrown telekinetically, much to its surprise, the creature found itself phasing through walls as it sailed between corridors and other containment chambers, in and out, until it sailed through the solid steel walls of its own cell, landing right back in the corner that it had started in. But rather than return to crying in a fetal position as it normally did, SCP-096 got right back up and raced back through the halls of the facility, homing in on SCP-343. Being sent back to its room was enough to keep the Shy Guy's rage state active, and it hadn't changed the fact that God had still looked at it, so he had to kill him. Traveling at anomalous speeds, SCP-096 blinked into existence right behind SCP-343 as he sat down and relaxed in his favorite chair. The horrific humanoid shrieked loudly. Although SCP-343 didn't turn around to look at it, he already knew it was there. He had sensed it even before it left its cell. With yet another lazy swish of his hand, SCP-343 sent the Shy Guy away. This time, SCP-096 realized its long legs seemed to be moving independently, walking backwards along the exact same steps it had taken to get into SCP-343's containment chamber. It continued going backwards, and despite its frustrated attempts to rush back towards the reality-warping old man, it couldn't. Little did the Shy Guy realize it wasn't the only one. SCP-343's command over the fundamental laws of the universe was so great that he had altered time itself. Everything was now running in reverse, albeit for a few short moments. Birds in the sky were flying backwards, waterfalls were flowing upwards, the Earth was spinning in the opposite direction on its axis. Everything in existence was like an old VCR tape being rewound, until SCP-096 found itself once again back in its cell. Now the Shy Guy was mad, really mad. The moment SCP-343 allowed time to return to its normal forward chronological flow, SCP-096 once again raced out of its containment chamber, hunting down the latest person to have seen its wide-jawed face. Usually, nothing could stop SCP-096 from catching up to its target, often killing them without fail. But the fact that SCP-343 could so easily rework the rules of the universe to send it back to its room made the self-conscious creature all the more agitated, and it was only going to get worse and worse. SCP-096 kept trying, infamously relentless, but every time SCP-343 presented some new, unpredictable way of stopping the Shy Guy from getting to him. On one attempt, he caused the creature's atoms to rearrange themselves into long strands the closer it got, effectively turning into Shy Guy's spaghetti. During another, SCP-035 actually reworked the way that sight works across the entire universe, making it so that on a conceptual level, he'd technically never looked at SCP-096, according to this newly redefined way of seeing things. Every time SCP-035 set the Shy Guy back, but never deterred him. He kept coming back. That is, until, bored by the constant back and forth between them, SCP-035 waited for SCP-096 to arrive next to him once again. At that moment, he snapped his fingers, and the creature stopped in its tracks. A story filled its mind, the story of a once normal kid. This young child had been bullied and ostracized by other children, made fun of for his appearance. They became depressed, self-loathing, keeping away from everyone out of fear that they'd be taunted. The child started to hide their face, desperate that nobody look at them and laugh.
Listen.
SCP-035 told SCP-096 there was nothing around them. The universe had seemingly faded away as the pair stood in a pocket of space outside of reality.
Just listen closely.
Silence. Not a whisper, not even the creature's own breathing could be heard.
No one is laughing at you anymore, my son.
SCP-035 whispered.
It is okay. You can stop now. There is nobody left who can hurt you.
With that, SCP-096's very reason for being had ceased. The Shy Guy didn't exist anymore. It didn't need to. Restoring the universe to its previous state with another click of his fingers, SCP-035 was free to sit back in his chair and relax. There, he could continue pretending he wasn't in control. There's never a good day for a supervillain attack or a tense feud with your closest sibling, and for the mighty THOR, this day was turning out to be both. As the self-proclaimed strongest Avenger flung his body across the planet Earth using his trusty magical hammer, Mjolnir, the Asgardian steeled himself for yet another confrontation with his evil half-brother, Loki, the god of mischief. As per usual, Loki was terrorizing the humans of a random city, using his illusions to manifest imaginary dragons and other ferocious beasts. And what was also usual is Thor had no idea what his brother's motive or endgame was. All the God of Thunder knew was that this kind of trickery-dickery would not be stood for. While these terrible creatures weren't real, they were still very frightening to the Earthlings. Civilians were running around in every direction away from Loki, and this was causing all kinds of chaos and traffic disturbances. Regardless of what Loki's plan was, Thor knew that his brother had to be stopped before things escalated further. On Earth, humans needed to rely on vehicles to get around, and even the slightest inconvenience in transportation could lead to disaster. Thor touched down in the same city square where Loki was unleashing his horde of make-believe monsters, landing in a classically cool superhero way.
Hello, brother,
Thor proclaimed.
I don't suppose you'll be stopping this without a fight.
Loki smiled a mischievous smile and replied,
Ah, Thor, we meet again. And once again, you're wrong. I can stop this any time I want.
Loki swiftly moved his hand through the air, casting a new spell to dismiss his diabolical decoys. The illusions dispersed naturally, and soon the two brothers were facing each other one-on-one.
See?
Loki chuckled. Thor was rightly confused by his brother's unpredictable actions. He pointed Mjolnir towards Loki in an accusatory manner.
No illusions, no sorcery. What are you really playing at, Loki?
Said Thor. And then Loki reached into his robes and produced an unusual cube-shaped object. As his good brother was all too aware, this particular cube was the latest in a long line of mysterious and powerful cubes that Loki had used for his various evil plans. Loki juggled the unknown cube from one hand to the other, then waved it in the air in front of Thor and began to laugh maniacally.
All I need to do is open this ancient box of mysteries, and I'll become completely unstoppable.
Don't you dare do it, Loki, Thor shouted. That sort of power will be misused in your hands.
That's precisely the point!
Loki continued to laugh, then reached for what appeared to be the lid of the cube. He grabbed the top of it and made a show of beginning to twist. This sent Thor's heroic instincts into high gear, and he threw Mjolnir at the cube, knocking it out of Loki's grasp. As the cube flew away from the grinning villain, Thor dove to retrieve it before his brother had the chance.
He soon held the strange item in one hand while calling Mjolnir back to the other. As Thor stared at the cube, pondering its purpose, Loki stretched out his hands in desperation.
Oh, no, not my cube! If you open it now, my plan is doomed!
Loki pleaded. Thor responded with a laugh of his own. Nice try, brother, but I'm going to open it. And so the God of Thunder did. Thor popped the cube's lid and braced himself for whatever cosmic force was about to be released, but for some reason, nothing happened. Still curious, Thor took a cautious look inside. As it turned out, the only thing within this apparently non-magical cube was what appeared to be a fully developed photograph.
What in Odin's name is this?
Thor removed the image and held it close to his face. It appeared to depict an emaciated, pale humanoid with long, spindly limbs standing in the corner of a compact room with smooth metal walls. In all his many years traveling the 9 realms, Thor had never seen anything like it. Whatever the creature actually was, it certainly did not look happy. Of course, what Thor was actually looking at was a photo taken of SCP-096 inside of its containment unit at the Foundation. The Shy Guy, as its nickname suggested, did not like having its face looked at, even via secondary means, such as photography or video recording. The anomalous humanoid sense of shame about its own appearance was so great that a mere moment after Thor fixed his Asgardian eyes upon its visage, SCP-096 began to stir in its containment unit. The creature wailed and covered its face with both of its hands on its long, sinewy arms. It screamed and carried on for a duration of 2 minutes, after which point SCP-096 sprinted towards the steel walls of its containment unit and smashed through. Reaching speeds greater than most motor vehicles, SCP-096 began to zero in on Thor's location. As was always the case when another being saw its face, the Shy Guy was compelled to utterly annihilate the offending observer with its bare hands. Thor himself had no idea that SCP-096 was en route and continued to squint at the photograph, perplexed by the mysterious entity depicted therein. Loki now resumed his mad laughter because once more, he had managed to trick his foolish brother into falling for one of his ingenious schemes.
Make sure to get a good look, brother, Loki gloated. Yes, look at the full creature. That will bring about your inevitable destruction.
Thor was annoyed.
If you think that showing me a gross picture of some lowly wretch will strike fear into my heart, you've truly forgotten what it means to be an Asgardian.
Save your sentiments for the halls of Valhalla,
the green-clad evildoer cackled.
You'll be there soon enough.
And with that, Loki used a charm to turn himself invisible and vanish completely from Thor's sight. Thor stomped his foot on the ground angrily. He wasn't sure how, but it seemed as though Loki had gotten the last laugh once again.
Loki!
He shouted after his brother.
Come back here and face me with honor!
Then the God of Thunder sighed pensively and thought to himself,
Who am I kidding? He's never going to change.
Thor looked at his trusty hammer.
Mjolnir, old friend, it seems like we've saved the day yet again. Shall we away back to Avengers HQ?
He then shook Mjolnir up and down like a puppeteer simulating a nod.
Splendid idea, Mjolnir. Glad you thought of it.
Thor chuckled, already in better spirits. That's when he began to hear the footsteps of SCP-096 rapidly approaching him. Thor turned his head towards the sound and saw the same disquieting creature from the photograph that was inside Loki's cube, zooming headlong towards him with reckless abandon. The Asgardian blinked. He almost couldn't believe his eyes. Whatever that thing was, it was faster than Thor could have possibly anticipated.
Was it looking for the photograph?
He wondered.
Hello there!
Thor called out as SCP-096 continued to make a beeline at the caped superhero. The God of Thunder waved the photograph of SCP-096 in the air.
Is this your, selfie?
In all likelihood, Loki had been his usual conniving self and stole that self-portrait from the miserable creature, hoping that it would mistake Thor for the thief. The God of Mischief had probably even used a glamour to disguise himself as Thor when he did the deed. Thor believed that all he had to do was clear up this misunderstanding, and that he and this strange beast could go their separate ways without coming to blows. It was a naive, optimistic, and ultimately incorrect view of the situation, but at least the hero's heart was in the right place.
I don't need this, so...
Thor said, trying to reason with the creature.
You can have it back if you'd like.
But SCP-096 showed no signs of stopping,
and was seemingly enraged even further by Thor flaunting its decidedly unflattering photograph. The Shy Guy kicked the ground and shot forward with a powerful burst of speed. One of its elongated arms slammed into Thor's face with enough force to nearly knock the Asgardian off his feet. Thor was so surprised that he instinctively whacked the creature with Mjolnir, sending SCP-096 careening backwards down the street. It wasn't launched more than a dozen feet before its powerful arms and legs dug into the pavement and slowed its velocity to 0. Even though the thing from the photo had taken a direct hit from Mjolnir, it barely looked phased on a physical level. One thing was for sure, the Shy Guy was still incredibly distraught, and it was directing all of those negative emotions towards the god of thunder.
What was this thing? What is this thing?
Thor wondered to himself. It was fast, strong, and durable to an unearthly degree. If this thing wanted to engage in single combat, Thor wouldn't back down. He was an Asgardian warrior, and sometimes that meant facing challenges head-on, no matter how suddenly they arose. Still, his time with the Avengers had taught him that having a clear reason to fight was sometimes even more important than the fight itself.
Hey, quick question, what are you?
He said aloud to the creature. SCP-096 didn't answer. Within seconds, it was on Thor again like a bilg snipe on another bilg snipe. The screaming humanoid swung wildly, pelting its opponent with blow after blow. Thor tried once more to communicate with his unknown enemy.
I have no quarrel with you, Weird One, Thor spoke. So take your noodle arms and be gone.
For all of its relentless ferocity, the humanoid abomination left countless openings that a seasoned warrior like Thor could easily exploit. Of course, most mortal combatants would be unable to endure the brunt of the Shy Guy's attacks for long enough, but true to his nature, Thor was a god. The Avengers struck back with another crushing blow from Mjolnir, aimed straight for the creature's sternum. Once again, the monster was pushed back for a moment, and then resumed its maddening onslaught.
A blow like that should have at least busted a rib or two. Were the bones of this horrible thing made of vibranium or some other rare metal out of the depths of space?
Thor realized he was now fighting on the defensive. While he had faced foes in the past with much greater physical strength than the Shy Guy, including his superhero colleague Bruce Banner's mean green, ever-loving alter ego, the Incredible Hulk, the sheer tenacity of SCP-096 meant that being careless with his own protection could lead to Thor taking unnecessary hits that would eventually wear him down in a prolonged fight. The wiry humanoid certainly didn't show any signs of slowing down or tiring, even though it had to be expending a lot of energy to move so quickly. Between his alternating deflections and counterblows against the creature, Thor mulled over his brother's words from earlier.
Loki was right about one thing. This is a fell creature if ever there was one. Still, as long as there is thunder in my blood, I won't allow a hairless cur like this to bring me my own destruction. Think, Thor, what would Stark do at a time like this? He says he's the smart one after all, humor him.
With his highly sophisticated tactical acumen that was similar to Iron Man except for the fact that it was much better and stronger, Thor efficiently assessed his current situation. While the pale beast was undoubtedly violent and far mightier than most terrestrial creatures, its attention and all the brute strength that came with it had been fixated solely on Thor since it arrived in the city. The Asgardian's best guess as to why was the photograph that Loki had tricked him into looking at. Devious trickster that he is, Loki must have known that this thing would hunt down and attempt to pulverize the latest being to see its face, which now, of course, happened to be Thor. The revelation of this fact meant that Thor no longer had to worry about the fate of civilians if he chose to relocate to a less populated battlefield, since the creature was now guaranteed to follow him. Nobody else needed to get hurt. While running from the fight wasn't exactly the God of Thunder's favorite strategy, it would massively reduce the chance of collateral damage. He'd be saving lives in classic Avengers fashion. Captain America would be so proud. Not that Thor would have done it any differently, even if he didn't have the Star-Spangled Man's approval. SCP-096 leaped in towards Thor to deliver its next walloping strike, but the Asgardian quickly grabbed it by the wrist and pulled the ferocious creature off its feet. He lifted it up and over his head before slamming it down hard into the pavement. With a bit of space between himself and his anomalous foe, Thor began to swing Mjolnir around by its leathery wrist strap. The Shy Guy desperately scrambled to its feet to resume the attack, but by that time, Thor had already thrown himself skyward. He soared between the buildings using the force of Mjolnir's trajectory,
making it his mission to exit the city as soon as possible. Thor looked down to see that SCP-096 was following him along the ground, exactly as he predicted it would. While the battle with the beast would most certainly continue the second he dropped back to Earth's surface, he could rest assured that the place where the showdown would take place could be chosen by him. He saw an evergreen forest on a nearby mountain and decided that it would do nicely as a place to finish this.
I'm sure no one would mind a few stray bolts of lightning around here, Thor thought.
The God of Thunder was amused by the prospect of going all out against this being. Even though it probably had its reasons for wanting to destroy the one that saw its face, Thor was past the point of taking chances on diplomacy. This distressing creature was, after all, an adversary that Loki had plotted to send after him through one means or another, and because of that, it was likely to have power and guile to spare. Thor breaking a sweat to vanquish the thing would be a fitting replacement for the fight that he would have to have with Loki. Thor's feet hit the ground on a stony mountain ledge, and once again he struck that iconic superhero landing pose. Remarkably, the Shy Guy had kept pace with Thor almost the entire time the Asgardian had been flying, smashing through every tree and boulder that stood in its path. Even so, Thor was more than ready for it. Storm clouds rumbled overhead. The sky above the mountain was trembling as Thor decided that it was time to bring down the thunder on his unfortunate foe.
Boom! Crack!
The heavens flashed with electrical might as Thor channeled the energy from several lightning bolts through Mjolnir before unleashing a consolidated blast of unbridled power onto SCP-096. The Shy Guy didn't even attempt to dodge as Thor's Thundershock treatment bombarded it with light and heat, the likes of which few mortals could withstand. Thor released a second blast, then a third, surrounding SCP-096 with as much lightning as these earthly skies would offer him. After keeping at this for a while, Thor decided to let up momentarily to check in on his foe, only to see that there were no signs of visible damage on the creature. It wasn't even slightly singed. The God of Thunder could feel his brother laughing at him from somewhere out of sight and out of reach. The monstrous humanoid in the forest below was proving to be far more than Thor had bargained for, but he was nowhere near ready to give in and accept defeat. Still, maybe this wasn't a fight worth having on Earth. All Thor's electrical attacks were doing was destroying trees, and the planet was already facing unprecedented levels of deforestation due to the greed of human CEOs and shady entrepreneurs. Thor certainly didn't want to be part of the problem, and now that it was occurring to him, he realized that he should probably try to do something about that once the situation with the Shy Guy was resolved. It didn't matter how close of a friend Elon Musk was to Tony Stark. These overreaching humans had to be given a stern talking to by the God of Thunder, with or without hammer in his hand. Of course, Thor's environmentalist concerns had to go on the back burner for now, since SCP-096 was advancing towards him once again, with no hint of slowing down.
Let's see if you can follow me back to Asgard, you son of an elf,
Thor thought. He held his hammer aloft and counted on Heimdall to deploy the Bifrost. The Rainbow Bridge arrived seconds before SCP-096's arms would have reached the Asgardian, and as expected, it instantly carried Thor into the interdimensional space between his destinations. Amidst the swirling sea of multicolored lights, Thor shared a laugh with nobody but himself and Mjolnir.
So much for Shy Guy,
said Thor.
Looks like it'll have to resolve those body issues on its own time. I've been through something similar, so I can relate. Best of luck, pitiful beast.
But while Thor was congratulating himself for his strategic retreat, he almost didn't notice that his foe hadn't actually stopped in its pursuit. As a matter of fact, SCP-096 was currently inside of the Bifrost and swiftly gaining on the God of Thunder. The Shy Guy was truly running in the 90s. Well, 90 miles per hour or more, but it made the same difference. The creature grabbed Thor by his ankles and screeched in mortified rage. Thor punched SCP-096 in the face, hoping to shake it off, but to no avail. The two opponents spun through the Bifrost, locked together in an unbreakable grapple until they collided with the walls of interdimensional space. Thor knew exactly where this was going, and he wasn't happy about it. Like a sheet of ice composed of photons, the outer limits of the Bifrost broke away, sending both combatants shooting off into the void. Seconds later, a wormhole spit Thor and SCP-096 out in a vast junkyard filled with the remains of countless spaceships and alien life forms.
Great, I'm trapped in this garbage world again. I knew I should have picked somewhere closer.
Thor shook off the nauseating effects of the failed interdimensional trip
SCP-096 was already hale and hearty for another round. Thor grimaced with frustrated anticipation.
How about a quick 5-minute rest?
Thor implored the shy guy.
Gentlemen's truce?
SCP-096 roared and dashed forth, more crazed than ever. Thor exhaled in futility.
I thought not.
He whipped Mjolnir around and hurled it straight for SCP-096's skull. The reliable Urus steel hammer made contact, knocking the creature onto its back. At the very least, Thor could always count on his signature weapon to help him out. Or could he? When the Asgardian tried to call the hammer back, he was shocked to find that SCP-096 had somehow grabbed a hold of its handle. Even more surprisingly, it now appeared to be wielding the hammer as easily as Thor could.
Son of a… You're telling me that thing is worthy?
The shy guy, now with Mjolnir in hand, pounced on Thor, swinging the hammer with no technique or finesse. It was everything Thor could do to simply avoid the creature's range. A blow from Mjolnir was enough to cause serious injury to even the most formidable Asgardian warrior.
Damn you, Mjolnir, we talked about this,
Thor thundered.
We're friends, aren't we?
But none of his words could get through to the hammer now that it was in the hand of SCP-096. In an act of righteous defiance, Thor called the fury of lightning into his own body. This strange foe, which had come from Loki's latest prank, was about to find out what happened when a god of thunder got serious. With the speed of a lightning bolt, Thor flew at SCP-096 and punched it so hard that its grip loosened on Mjolnir for all but a second, and that second was all Thor needed to reclaim his weapon. His hand clung tightly to Mjolnir's handle as he swung the weapon into the shy guy's body with all of his might. The shockwave of this forceful blow launched piles of debris high into the air and sent SCP-096 tumbling across the surface of the planet like a thrown piece of discarded food at an Asgardian feast. With another pulse of electricity, Thor magnetized the portions of the rubble which contained spaceship parts and used his manipulation of that same energy to bury the shy guy in the deepest heap of trash he could manage. And with one last flick of Mjolnir, Thor sent himself hurtling through the largest wormhole in the sky above and back into space where it would be far more difficult for his foe to follow him. Finally, with some distance, Thor breathed a sigh of relief.
You almost had me that time, Loki. What an unusual being. Fought like a berserker, but was somehow also pure of heart. A kindred spirit to myself, perhaps? Even so, I truly hope to never meet that thing again.
Agent Lane's eyes scanned over the document he'd been sent. The decryption program had finished unraveling the sensitive data that the SCP Foundation's cybersecurity kept hidden beneath layers of encryption. It had been a few hours since he'd received the leaked document, sent to him from a mole that had been active within the ranks of Foundation personnel for some time. And as for what was on this secret document, it was an intake list, the records and names of everyone recently brought into D-Class. Lane scoured the rows upon rows of inmates, violent criminals, the worst of the worst that the Foundation used as human lab rats. Then his eyes settled over one name, the exact one he'd been looking for. The true identity of a man codenamed the Hatchet, a mass murderer responsible for coordinating multiple acts of international terrorism. But to Agent Lane, this man wasn't a threat to be feared. He was a bait in a trap for something far worse. The Global Occult Coalition had long been the face of officially sanctioned legitimacy in the fight against the anomalous. While the SCP Foundation operated in a more clandestine fashion, the GOC was operated by and acted under the authority of the United Nations. They were mandated with policing the paranormal world, a role nobody in the GOC took lightly. Their ultimate goal was a world rid of all anomalies. While the Foundation opted for containment, the Coalition preferred extermination. But despite this fundamental difference in their operational structures, the two organizations maintained a fragile alliance, which is why Agent Lane needed bait in order for his plan to work. The objective was simple: kill SCP-096, also known as the Shy Guy, an anomalous entity with a long, disproportionate human body that could use impossible speeds to kill anyone that looked at its face, even through an image. That was what worried the GOC. It seemed all too easy for SCP-096 to be used as a weapon, especially for assassinations. It wouldn't take much for the Foundation to mail a photo of SCP-096 to anyone, say a politician who opposed them or the head of another group of interest. Then all they'd have to do is sit back and wait as SCP-096 dispatched its unwitting target, along with any witnesses that happened to see it appear. So the Coalition had decided it was time to take the Shy Guy off the board before anyone got any unsavory ideas. But there was still one issue with that. Given the GOC and SCP Foundation's rocky relationship, Agent Lane had been instructed to leave no trace of the Coalition's involvement. He needed someone else to be responsible for the actual elimination of SCP-096, so that the GOC could deny any and all involvement. That's when he'd gotten the idea. Who better to call on for a covert, strictly off-the-books mission? Only one of the world's most elite Special Forces units, with no affiliation to the GOC whatsoever, Delta Force. Engineering a scenario where Lane could get the Deltas to take out SCP-096 was going to be tricky. He couldn't give them a direct order to kill the creature. That could too easily lead back to the GOC. So the mastermind behind this mission needed to think outside of the box. How could he get the attention of Delta Force? Well, by offering up one of the world's most wanted terrorists. After all, Delta Force was renowned for undertaking missions that involved counterterrorism, as well as the securing and sometimes elimination of high-value targets. And that was where the hatchet came into plan. Given the severity and extreme nature of his many crimes, he was certainly considered high value by the US government. However, it was while awaiting trial that the hatchet had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The official story was that he had died in prison following a fight with another inmate, but rumors circulated about an escape attempt. Of course, neither were correct. Now Agent Lane knew the truth. The Foundation had him, which means he was within the reach of the GOC. Issuing a coded command to his mole working inside the SCP Foundation, Lane instructed that the hatchet would be making an escape of sorts. At least that's how it would appear, but it would be completely staged. Under the cover of night, the mole drugged and kidnapped the hatchet, breaking open an air vent and making it look like someone had crawled their way through. Nobody had, and instead the hatchet was carried unconscious to a Foundation vehicle the mole had hotwired. If he drove off in his own car, the Foundation would be able to trace the escape back to him, and then the GOC. Bundling the terrorist into the trunk, the mole drove several miles away from the Foundation site to an extraction point where Agent Lane was waiting.
"So he's how you're gonna lure out the Delta Force," the mole said as he and Lane lifted the hatchet aboard the chopper. "But how are you going to get SCP-096 to come out too? The Foundation keeps it crying in that cell."
"They can't stop it getting out when someone sees it though, right?" Lane replied.
"Yeah, it moves way too fast," the mole confirmed. "All someone has to do is look at it, and it can get out even when
they look at a picture of it." The agent finished his sentence.
"Oh,"
the mole gasped, realization spreading across his face. "Our friend the hatchet here isn't just bait to lure out Delta Force," Agent Lane explained. "He's bait for both. SCP-096 and Delta will both be coming after him. That way, as far as the Foundation knows, SCP-096 will be killed during a standard Delta Force mission to recapture an on-the-run terrorist mastermind. And meanwhile, the GOC gets complete deniability. It was nothing to do with us, we weren't involved."
"Perfect scapegoat," the mole commented. "Thing is, if this is meant to be such a covert mission, then why risk security by telling me?"
"Dead man don't talk," Agent Lane replied quietly, pulling a silenced handgun from his holster and squeezing the trigger, firing 3 times for good measure. With the loose end tied up, nothing linked the global occult coalition to the hatchet's apparent escape. Sure enough, the Foundation fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. While they were busy locking down the facility, sealing the air vents that they believed their D-class prisoner had escaped through, Agent Lane had the hatchet handcuffed, securely under lock and key. The helicopter took them a short distance to a quiet airstrip, where they boarded an uncharted plane to a safe house. To avoid any further links to the GOC, Lane had to transport the hatchet as off the grid as possible until he got him to their destination. Even then, the safe house couldn't be one that the GOC had ever used before. Any link in the Foundation or Delta Force would smell a rat. The leaked intelligence that was soon received by Delta Force seemed to confirm their worst fears. Not only was the hatchet still alive, but he was free and apparently hiding out in a safe house.
While they would never publicly acknowledge the unit's activities, the Department of Defense issued an objective to Delta Force: track down the Hatchet to his current location and either capture him or kill him. A squad of some of the most highly trained United States troops were assembled. Before joining Delta Force, most of them had been recruited from the elite 75th Ranger Regiment, as well as from other branches of Special Forces and the wider U.S. Army. The team wasn't told by their commander, whose identity was classified, where they were going. All the information they were given was only the essentials, just that there was a high-value target holed up in a safe house. Although they had no idea there would actually be two, only the second was unlike anything the Deltas had ever seen. Agent Lane was watching over hidden infrared cameras. They were sent to cut out the minute the lights came on. No point in going through all this trouble, only to see 096 on his feed and be killed too. Silently, using all the skills and stealth that they had been trained in, the squad of Delta Force operators slipped into the safe house. Their movements were perfectly synchronized, practiced hours and hours at a time. They checked corners. Two would sweep one room of the building whilst two more protected them, and none of them would move on until they confirmed that the area was clear. Floor by floor, they worked their way up the building, ascending closer and closer to where the Hatchet was. The operators were fully expecting to meet armed resistance from the Hatchet's loyalists when they arrived. The fact that the place was so quiet didn't seem right. In fact, none of the lights were on either. The Delta Force unit needed to wear night vision just to navigate their way around. Despite it seeming suspicious, none of them could have guessed it was intentional. Agent Lane had set everything up to work perfectly. Arriving at one room, the Special Forces troops could hear the sound of someone behind the door. Their voice was muffled, like something was obscuring their mouth and preventing them from speaking. This was it. The team lined up against the nearest wall and placed an explosive charge on the door. With a mighty explosion, the entrance burst wide open, and the team filed in, weapons trained on the room's sole occupant. They could see through the hazy green of their goggles a figure sat in a chair. No, restrained to a chair, with something in front of him. It looked like a frame, a photograph in a frame. Who sits in front of a photo in the dark? Suddenly, the lights came up, causing the operator's night vision goggles to beam bright white straight into their eyes. The second the lights came on, the camera's Agent Lane was watching through cut off, and he purged the hard drive they were connected to, leaving no recording, no evidence of the situation he'd engineered. Meanwhile, as the room was illuminated, the first of the Delta Force team to take off his goggles saw who it was tied to the chair. It was the Hatchet, bound by his wrists and ankles, eyes pried open, so he couldn't look away from the framed photo in front of him. A photo of SCP-096. Suddenly, within the blink of an eye, the tall, slender creature had appeared in the room with the captive terrorist. The Deltas, removing their goggles, turned in horror to see 096 slaughtering their target. And the moment they looked at it, the wailing Shy Guy started bearing down on them, too. Contact!
Their captain yelled.
Open fire! Hostile contact!
They started shooting, their bullets having little effect on the looming, wiry monster as it came at each of the squad one by one. The muzzle flashes illuminated the oncoming anomaly. Those brief glimpses of it flickering of gunfire made it look all the more horrifying. Screams filled the room, echoing through the building as SCP-096 decimated the team that had unknowingly been sent in to kill it. One of the Deltas was still struggling with his night vision, unable to detach them from his face thanks to a clasp that had gotten stuck. All he could hear were his squad mates around him being killed, but with no way of seeing what was happening.
Private! Private!
The captain gurgled. He sounded hurt, but the operator couldn't see how badly or what had attacked him.
Shoot the thing! Shoot it now! I can't see, sir!
He yelled back, goggles still strapped to his face, eyes shut to keep out the searing whiteness.
10 o'clock!
The captain replied, directing his subordinate to aim his weapon slightly to the left. There was a sickening twisting sound, and the captain's voice cut out. The private fired, his shot winging the creature. It whimpered, then seemed to vanish as quickly as it had arrived. Pulling a combat knife from the sheath on his belt, the operator was able to cut the strap, keeping the goggles over his eyes. When his vision cleared, he looked around to see an empty room smeared in blood. Even the Hatchet hadn't survived, killed in the chair he'd been held in. The operator took a closer look at the photo the terrorist had been made to look directly at. It was hideous, tall and thin, arms that looked too long and a huge mouth.
And now it was behind him. It would never stop killing anyone that looked at it.
SCP-096, the Shy Guy, woke up in an unfamiliar room without a thought in its head. However, one thing quickly occurred to it. This was not its containment chamber. No, the solid steel cube that had kept it locked up for decades now didn't have a front desk or walls covered in strange childlike murals or tinny party music playing over old speakers. Wherever SCP-096 had found itself, it certainly wasn't the place it had come to call home. If it could read, it would have registered the words behind the front desk, painted onto the wall: BANBAN's Kindergarten, where joy comes alive. Little did 096 know, something really did come to life here at BANBAN's Kindergarten, but it definitely wasn't joy. SCP-096 was typically used to a much more confined space, so presented with so much strange freedom, its natural instinct was to wander around, whimpering quietly to itself. This place was certainly peculiar, with multiple large reinforced doors, each one having a large red button fixed to the wall above them. A strange green creature was painted on the wall, with an affixed speech bubble that read, "Jumbo Josh says, eat fruits and vegetables if you want to be strong like me." Though 096 paid no mind to such things. This place looked like an SCP Foundation containment facility, mixed with an off-brand Chuck E. Cheese, and some tiny part of the Shy Guy's dim and dismal brain wanted to see more of it. What other secrets could it hold? The Shy Guy pressed one of the big red buttons, causing the doors to open underneath it. There was a faint sound of childish laughter somewhere down the distant hall. How had it ever found its way into such a strange place? The deeper the Shy Guy wandered, the more strange murals it saw on the wall. There was one for a large orange cartoon jellyfish with one staring eye, where the speech bubble read, "Stinger Flynn says, having many arms allows me to help a lot of people." Then, a squat blue gorilla-like creature with sharp lower teeth had a speech bubble that read, "Captain Fiddles says, ooga booga, booga ooga." A white feminine cat-like creature had the speech bubble, "Banbalina says, kindness is free, so sprinkle it everywhere." A misshapen pink bird creature had the speech bubble, "Opila Bird says, laughter is the best medicine, so make sure to smile." And of course, most importantly of all, presiding over the creativity room, was a mural of a grinning red creature wearing a pair of party hats on its head like horns. His speech bubble read, "Banban says, sharing is caring. Your pancreas is mine." A whiteboard not far from this mural had the words, "Run for your lives," hastily scrawled onto it. To anyone but the Shy Guy, who had no point of reference, this was clearly not a normal kindergarten. As the Shy Guy passed into the hallway, slowly lumbering along, it suddenly felt an intense spike of burning pain right through its forehead. Rising like a fever pitch, the Shy Guy's subdued whimpers quickly escalated into horrifying wails of animalistic rage. This could only mean one thing. Somewhere, something had made the terrible mistake of gazing at the Shy Guy's face. In fact, not 10 feet away, the unfortunate Opila Bird had made that very mistake. It typically peeked out from behind one of the hallway's pillars to get a good look at any potential intruders or new prey wandering into its midst. But this time, the beastly bird's curiosity had taken it from predator to prey itself. Though it wouldn't realize this until it was already too late. As the mutant bird creature skittered back into the cavernous hall filled with plastic trees and an underwhelming play area, the Shy Guy came galloping after it on all fours, roaring with fury. The Opila Bird was shocked to see the creature giving chase.
"This doesn't make sense. I meant to chase you. You're not meant to chase me."
But things are rarely fair when it comes to the Shy Guy. Arguably one of the most dangerous Euclid-class creatures ever kept in Foundation containment. The Opila Bird flapped desperately towards the boarded-up escape hatch, but the Shy Guy was so much faster. It grabbed hold of the bird, gripping it in its iron clutches, and began to stretch open its bottom jaw with a blood-curdling roar. We'll spare you the details of what happened next, but suffice to say, little more than a handful of feathers were left. After finishing off the Opila Bird, the Shy Guy reverted from rage back to pitiful sadness. This place was no better than the SCP Foundation. There were still creatures here to look at its face and drive it into a state of extreme emotional distress. It was horrible. The Shy Guy needed to find a way to hide himself away again, so he decided to tear away the planks covering up the escape hatch and lope down the narrow hall. In there, the Shy Guy actually found something to its liking. 2 platforms, one on either side of the room, with what seemed to be a deep, dark chasm between the two. For most, there was an electrical lift system for carrying them between the platforms, but the Shy Guy had no interest in the platforms. He only sought the darkness below, where nobody could see his face. That would suit him just fine. The Shy Guy jumped over the guardrail and plummeted down below into the dark. Feeling the air against its cold gray skin as it felt wonderful. It dared to think that it might even find solace in this deep, dark place, but as soon as he hit something solid, some kind of metal lift system, alarms went off, and flashing red lights soon made everything down there in the darkness visible. To be exposed like this while it thought it was hidden was the dreaded Shy Guy's worst nightmare. Little did he know, he would soon become the worst nightmare of a number of other beasts. As the Shy Guy crawled off the metal platform, hoping that perhaps it could find another place to hide down here, its hands and feet splashed into shallow water. Had something sprung a leak down here? The Shy Guy began wandering the half-dark as the water of this flooded sub-basement area pooled around him. It had no idea that another creature was already sneaking up behind it, getting ready to strike. Before 096 could even react, several whip-like orange tentacles wrapped around its limbs and began delivering an antagonizing shock through its body. More tentacles came in soon after, wrapping around the Shy Guy's body and face, delivering shock after shock after shock, with its millions of tiny, venomous stinger barbs. For a second it seemed like the surprise attack might actually be able to subdue the monster, but little did the Shy Guy's attacker, the monstrous real Stinger Flynn, know that attacking it was just another way to activate its infamous rage state. The second that Stinger Flynn relented, even just for a moment, the Shy Guy grabbed him by the tentacles and slammed him into the watery floor, again and again and again, until the grip of his tentacles loosened around the Shy Guy's body, and he was defenseless. With Stinger panicked and immobilized, the Shy Guy released the full force of his supernatural fury, striking the demonic jellyfish with his fists until what was left couldn't be distinguished from the water it used to be floating in. Stinger Flynn had been completely annihilated. The Shy Guy once again temporarily returned to a state of calm and wandered out of this watery basement into a nearby hallway, where everything was bright and dry. The walls were painted in garish, childlike drawings of a jungle with janky-looking animals. The Shy Guy paid no mind to any of it. All he wanted was to find somewhere that he could actually be alone, and away from prying eyes of all these freaks. This dream was short-lived, because as soon as the Shy Guy found a new room, a wide-open auditorium filled with inflatable jungle trees, like a crude play area, he was being stalked yet again. A powerful, muscular predator with veins stretching over its bulging muscles and blue skin. It knew that this intruder had already killed 2 of its fellow garden dwellers, but this time, it would put this spindly, pale stranger in its place. The Shy Guy heard something rumbling towards it from behind, and turned upon hearing the blood-curdling war cry of Ooga Booga Booga Ooga. It was the gorilla-like Captain Fiddles, with strands of saliva hanging from his tusks. He leaped onto the Shy Guy and began pounding into its hideous face with his huge blue fists. Captain Fiddles would destroy the Shy Guy, pound him into the concrete until he stopped moving. The one thing that Captain Fiddles didn't expect was for the Shy Guy to start fighting back. And he was about to learn the hard truth that the Shy Guy could fight a lot harder than him. The SCP's spindly but immensely powerful arms grabbed Captain Fiddles by the shoulders and threw him into the wall, causing huge cracks to crawl up towards the ceiling. Before Captain Fiddles could even think about wrenching himself free, the Shy Guy leaped to his feet and bounded over to him. The Shy Guy grabbed Captain Fiddles by the ankles and ripped him out of the wall, letting his body drop to the floor and then unleashing hell upon him. Captain Fiddles would have begged for mercy if he wasn't already dead. Before the Shy Guy could even begin to calm down, a trapdoor opened in the floor beneath him, dropping him into a new area, a multicolored maze where 096 was trapped like a helpless rat, with the body count of an atomic bomb. Once again, the Shy Guy didn't need to go looking for trouble, because trouble was already on its way. The pure white, cat-like Banbalina pounced from a sharp corner in the maze, claws bared. She jumped onto the Shy Guy, latching onto him and clawing, trying to scratch his nightmare of a face. If the Shy Guy had ever possessed anything resembling patience, it would have run out long before now. He grabbed Banbalina, shrugging off the pain of her claws and tossing her into the darkness high above. She flew off with a cat-like yell and hit some distant ceiling with a crunch. Suffice to say, she wouldn't be back to bother the Shy Guy again. Tired and angry, the pale abomination didn't feel like wandering through a maze. Instead, it just charged straight through, destroying colorful wall after colorful wall. When it encountered whatever was behind this extremely frustrating afternoon, it would destroy it with extreme prejudice. That was almost certainty. After breaking through one more wall, the Shy Guy tumbled out into a strange room, where a grinning red creature was waiting for him. Wearing 2 party hats on top of his head, this was no mere lackey. It was BANBAN himself, the one behind this nightmarish kindergarten. He stared right into the Shy Guy's face with no fear at all, almost like he knew something that the Shy Guy didn't. And it was true. He had no plan to fight the Shy Guy himself. He'd brought a champion with him. As the Shy Guy started to scream in rage, all the boxes behind BANBAN tumbled out of the way as a huge figure rose. A behemoth at least 50 feet tall, with green skin, giant teeth, and huge, staring eyes. It was Jumbo Josh, and if the Shy Guy wanted to graduate from this nightmare kindergarten, it would need to defeat him and BANBAN. The Shy Guy growled, digging its claws into the ground and preparing to charge forward. Challenge accepted. It does not leave bodies, just blood smeared across the roads. Hundreds dead, thousands left wondering what happened to their missing family members, as Foundation agents sneak into their homes and restructure their memories. One containment breach, one unfortunate photo of an impossible monster's face. All that's left is to clean up, bag the creature's head, and take it back to containment, hoping it would never be seen again. Far below in a kingdom of fire, something even more diabolical takes an interest. Such power, such ferocity, such indiscriminate destruction. He hasn't seen anything like it in a long, long time, and he wants to get acquainted. Imagine being a creature so violent that you catch the devil's attention. Ugh, are those cobwebs? Gross, this place is filthy. I guess no one's been down here in a while? Hey, what's under this tarp? The Anomatron 6000. Looks like this thing hasn't seen a whole lot of use lately. What's the worst that could happen if I dusted it off? Chaos exploded beyond the doors of the ATV as they burst open, steel-capped boots thumping against the asphalt and crunching shards of broken glass underfoot. The blindingly bright neon of the strip was dwarfing the flicker of flames, barely making much more light than the usual twinkling machines that offered hollow promises of winning big. Agent North felt his fingers flex around the grip of his rifle as he caught sight of the carnage unfolding through the shattered glass front of the Vegas hotel. Jazz, better activate your disruptor. One of his squad mates nudged him back to awareness. Whatever's going on in there, it's turning these folks into animals. The squad flipped on the anti-memetic devices that the tech boys had attached to their tactical helmets, keeping themselves safe from whatever had infected the civilians inside. Or so they believed. They formed up, approaching the building in a defensive pattern, and cautiously made their way inside. The report had called it a riot, but that seemed like an understatement. The place had been ransacked so badly it was barely recognizable as either the hotel or casino it advertised itself as. Slot machines had been smashed to pieces, the metal and plastic torn apart seemingly by hand, given the red streaks and fingernails embedded in some. Discarded chips lay strewn across the floor, those that weren't being carried by the armfuls scooped up in the shirts of the people that were left standing. Each of them was frenzied, feral, eyes wide and bloodshot, baring all their teeth as they scrapped together. Agent North spotted 2 men trading punches, clawing at each other on the blood-stained marble floor, with the body of another lying still beneath them. The members of Mobile Task Force Mu-0 kept their weapons raised, but the civilians' wrath seemed to be solely focused on each other. All except one. Sat calmly at a blackjack table was a man in a suit, calmly sipping wine from a tall glass and humming to himself.
There is a house in New Orleans.
He casually turned around in his seat to face the Foundation operatives as they approached, laser dots hovering over the open shirt beneath his suit jacket.
Evening, boys. I'm surprised it took you so long to find me. After all, where else on this mortal coil would I be if not Sin City? I mean, I'm practically right next door.
The man was flicking a playing card around his fingers, the 6 of hearts.
Anyone want to play? How about a round of Devil's Grip? Oh, and you can take those fancy new gizmos on your helmets off. You look ridiculous.
But before we continue with any more of the Devil's Banter, a question for you. Is something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? Regardless if you have a clinical mental health issue like depression or anxiety, or if you're just a human who lives in this world who is going through a hard time, therapy can give you tools to approach your life in a very different way. And that's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and more accessible, and this is an important mission because finding a therapist can be really hard, especially when you're limited to the options in your area. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to a professional therapist in as little as a few days. It's easy to sign up and get matched with a therapist. There's a link in my description. It's betterhelp.com/SCP Explained. Clicking that link helps support this channel, but it also gets you 10% off your first month of BetterHelp, so you can connect with a therapist and see if it helps you. And because finding a therapist is a little like dating, if you don't really fit with that therapist, which is a common thing with therapy, you can easily switch to a new therapist at no additional cost without stressing about insurance, who's in your network, or anything like that. So if you're struggling, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/SCP Explained. Thank you again, BetterHelp, for supporting this channel. And now back to our mobile task force and their dealings with the devil. The team exchanged glances, but not one of them touched their disruptors. Agent North spoke up, demanding this mysterious figure release the civilians from his influence, as a precondition for any kind of negotiation here.
Influence? I did not do that.
The man shrugged, the card between his fingers switching to the King of Diamonds with a sleight of hand trick.
You ask me, that's just a design flaw. But then again, you weren't all made in my image, were you?
The agent's voice got louder, barking for the mystery man to submit to their demands immediately. The squad members all raised their assault rifles. If the stranger didn't release the civilians, they might be forced to use lethal force.
Oh, you mean release them from their basic human instincts? Well, that seems a little bit cruel and unusual, even for your Foundation.
The man chuckled, finishing his wine.
But if you insist.
With a click of his fingers, the room went silent. Calm instantaneously spread among the people who had been literally tearing each other apart only seconds earlier. But taking more than a cursory glance at the civilian told the MTF operatives that there was still something wrong. Each of the people in the casino wore a vacant expression, eyes empty as if they were completely void of life. Agent North barked out a question. What had he done to these people?
Now, Mr. North,
the man said, standing up.
A deal is a deal. Convey me to the Foundation. I've been waiting for the sightseeing part of my vacation.
Hearing his name from this unknown, clearly anomalous reality warper made Agent North instinctively raise his gun. The man staring down the barrel didn't flinch. Instead, a wry smile crawled across his face.
Oh, come now, Mr. North. Perhaps I shouldn't have expected rationality. Oh, that's a little beyond you, isn't it?
The figure chuckled, everything about him filling the MTF operatives with an overpowering sense of dread as they kept their weapons trained on him.
So many nights wondering about your wife, whether or not she forgave you for that accident.
The man took a step forward until the rifle's muzzle was pushing directly against him.
Would you like to know the truth, Mr. North?
His voice lowered to an ominous whisper.
She never did.
Bang! The shot echoed through the casino floor. a faint trail of smoke winding up into the air. Agent North blinked in disbelief. In the flash that followed him pulling the trigger, the figure standing before him and his squad mates had vanished. They scanned the area to try and spot their target, only to be met with pitch-dark shadows surrounding them. Came the man's voice through the emptiness. "You can't kill the devil, Jeremy." Back at command, the Foundation analysts were panicking. MTF-Mu-0 had vanished. They scrabbled around trying to figure out what to do. Someone threw out the suggestion that the full force of Alpha-1, the Red Right Hand, be dispatched to Las Vegas to launch a full-scale assault on SCP-4661, the area of the city that anomalously overlapped with another plane of reality, causing sinful behavior to intensify within Vegas. Another threw out the idea, suggesting that SCP-507 should be sent to retrieve the dimensionally displaced task force. As they squabbled, researchers and security found themselves being drawn into an argument, all of them feeling an overwhelming notion that they were right and everyone disagreeing with them was wrong. What had begun as a tactical discussion devolved into a free-for-all. Shoves turned into swings of fists, the hurling of office chairs as a brawl ensued. Little did any personnel notice an unauthorized new arrival, who seemed to be walking around the facility's halls. It was the same man from the casino, strolling calmly and casually past the windowed containment cells that housed anomalies, like an eccentric collector perusing an art gallery. "Boring," the man scoffed, seeing an orange blob shrink away from him behind the glass. "Oh, so boring." He passed a beak-faced doctor in dark clothes. "Derivative," the man sighed, seeing a statue that refused to move even when he blinked. "Absurdly overpowered." Within its acid-filled vat, the reptile seethed with anger. "Oh, look, one of my antiques," the man mused, passing a vacant mahogany desk with two vacant chairs, a simpler straight-back seat, and a large, ornate throne-like office chair, embellished with brass and royal purple velvet padding. Then the man came to a windowless room, the one thing that seemed to garner his curiosity in the entire facility. In actuality, it wasn't the unassuming containment cell that caught his attention. It was the sounds of distraught crying emanating from within. The despaired sobs didn't deter the man from effortlessly waving his hands and causing the heavy, hermetically sealed door to start buckling, glowing as the dense steel began to melt. The molten metal door split apart, then cooled in an instant, leaving a gap in the entrance to the dark containment chamber. Sat in the far corner, rocking itself slightly, was a shape with legs and arms far too long to be hunched over comfortably in the cramped room. A paper bag had been left over its face, as the tall, wiry, thin creature gently rocked itself between sobs. SCP-096 had felt the same unease that now ran through the entire facility, and even with its face covered, it could sense its source getting closer with each step. "Oh, enough," the figure said, walking into the cell, startling the shy guy. "If I wanted to hear the desperate cries of the damned, I would have stayed home." The man clicked his fingers, causing flames to erupt out of nowhere, singeing the paper bag into nothing but ash in seconds. SCP-096 recoiled, pushing itself further into the corner, ineffectually covering its face with its elongated limbs. Now, don't cower." The man unnervingly, calmly offered out a hand to the creature. "I did come all this way to see if the rumors were true. And just look at you, you're real. Even if I'm impressed. The rage of a creature that would kill a human just for the insolence of looking at it. Remarkable. Here, while everyone's hashing things out in the command center, what say you and I have a little chat about your future, 096? That's what they call you, isn't it?" Slowly recognizing its designation, the shy guy turned, trembling to face the suited figure in its cell. The moment the man's eyes looked at its face, the anomalous creature could feel the familiar, intensifying rage that it was so accustomed to, urging it to lash out at the man and kill him on the spot. But somehow, it was being suppressed, like the figure's influence was enough to keep the rage state at bay, for now. Either that, or for maybe the first time ever, SCP-096 was too scared to attack. "Oh, there's that handsome face," the man beamed. "See, you wouldn't have to hide for hell's sake. You could be a real force for wanton chaos, my friend. Now, while I'm confined to only whisper in the ears of mortals, you should be getting out there and showing some abject misery.
Look, there's a perfectly good desk of mine a few rooms away. What say we take a seat and strike up a deal? After all, better the devil you know. I can give you anything you truly desire, whether it's freedom from this place, revenge on the Foundation. If you're really all that insecure about it, I could even give you a facelift. In return, you have to do one thing for me. Let as many people see you as possible. Maybe even the whole world, even. Oh, you'd have so much killing to do. The very suggestion of being perceived by so many people was enough to enrage SCP-096. It broke free of whatever unfamiliar hold the figure had over it, hurling one of its arms out in a vicious swipe. Just as its fingers were about to reach the man, they passed through the now vacant spot where he had been standing. He had vanished within a split second that the shy guy had lunged at him. The anonymous creature wailed, then screamed, as the figure's voice echoed around the room, giving another sinister chuckle. Oh my, how disappointing, he sneered. To think you could have had anything you wanted. No matter. Screaming and trying to attack me won't do you any good either. I won't go down like some of the others that have snuck a forbidding glance at that mug of yours. My physical form isn't even really here. It's still trapped on the lowest layer. You're not the only one kept contained, my friend. I just use this human shape for personal travel above ground. But it seems my little vacation is coming to a halt. Here, won't you join me for the return trip? The ground beneath SCP-096's feet began to shudder violently, the floor cracking and crumbling away. But instead of bringing it crashing down to the floor of the facility below its cell, an amber volcanic glow rose between the cracks underfoot. Piece by piece, the floor broke away, some invisible force pulling SCP-096 downwards as it flailed its arms, clawing at the ground as it crumbled away until the shy guy lost its grip and began to plummet. Searing heat raged all around it, tongues of flame practically reaching out to singe the creature's body as it fell further and further. Its own wails and screams joined a deafening cacophony of others, of never-ending voices crying out in torment and suffering. After what felt like an eternity of falling and burning, SCP-096 hit the stony ground, the air pungent with the stench of brimstone. Sat before him on a chair adorned in brass and royal purple was the same man from earlier. As the shy guy staggered to its feet, the man's visage started to catch fire, slowly burning away to reveal the blood-colored skin and huge protruding horns of a fallen angel beneath the disguise. Perhaps after a several thousand-year stint in the Eighth Circle, you'll reconsider my generous offer. Satan chuckled before snapping his clawed fingers, causing SCP-096 to vanish in a burst of flame. Excruciating torture awaited the defenseless creature. The Prince of Darkness's underlings would see to that. But as he reclined on his throne, he didn't realize a tall, thin humanoid form reappeared behind him, eyes filled with a rage that didn't care if he was the devil. He should not have looked at its face. The devil struggles in the grasp of the nightmare he unknowingly brought down into his boiling kingdom. Perhaps there's a spell or some terrible curse that can free him from the monster's grasp, but somehow he knows that nothing will save him. He could flee to any of the Ninth Circles, and the monster would brave fire and brimstone to find him. He could throw the creature into a reoccurring pit of infinite darkness, and it would find its way back into the light. Somehow, in the same hubris that had gotten him cast out of heaven so many eons ago, the Lord of Darkness may have brought about his own destruction, and he may have thought he knew darkness, until the black maw of SCP-096 gaped open, and Satan himself beheld a darkness deeper and more permanent than any he had ever known. There is panic in the streets of all the world's major cities. A pale humanoid monster has gone on an unstoppable rampage, destroying lives with unmeasured speed and brutality. The fleeing people know they cannot fight, and that even the military has failed to stop this thing. The only thought that rings in their heads is whether or not they will be next. The Foundation, however, comes to have a different perspective, one that a certain Dr. Dan has had for years.
It is time to get rid of SCP-096 once and for all. In the depths of space, no one can see your face. Well, that's not exactly how the saying goes, but it was certainly the hope of one intrepid spacefaring mobile task force that was assigned with the Herculean task of neutralizing SCP-096, aka the Shy Guy, for good. After the tragic leak of video from inside Site-19, which depicted the Shy Guy inside of its containment unit, a viral sensation caused SCP-096's face to be seen by over 2 million internet users across the globe. The video was taken down by the Foundation, but not before 096 broke containment and claimed the lives of all of the many witnesses. This gruesome worldwide massacre required an exorbitant expenditure of high-quality amnestics and left the Foundation with a sobering reminder that some anomalies are simply too dangerous to be kept alive. Dr. Dan was right all along, even if his methods of proving it all those years ago had been utterly monstrous. Once the leakers were found within the Foundation, they were escorted on the same shuttle that would be transporting SCP-096 into deep space, where both the unfortunate leakers and the Shy Guy were about to be thrown into a black hole. The primary video leaker, a newbie researcher by the name of Dr. Arnold, was sweating in his lab coat as the shuttle drifted through the stars towards the location. Surrounded by mobile task force agents, he knew that attempting to fight for his escape would be completely fruitless, especially when the Foundation ship he and his fellow leakers were on was so far out in space.
They're all really serious about this,
he thought. In the brief time that Dr. Arnold had been employed at the Foundation, he could have sworn that he heard one mantra repeated to him at least a few dozen times. Secure, contain, protect. We do not destroy unless all other options are exhausted. As Dr. Arnold stewed on that quote, he wondered if all of his options truly had been exhausted. Was the Foundation really going to destroy him along with SCP-096, a being that had already caused untold death even before the accident that he had had a hand in causing? Was it fair to hold him responsible for the actions of a creature that, in a just world, would have been permanently dealt with a long time ago? However, outside of these thoughts, all Dr. Arnold could do was try to reassure the other researchers involved in the leak incident and wait for the shuttle to arrive at its destination, the Gaia BH1 black hole, the nearest black hole to the planet Earth.
Don't worry, this is all a ploy just to scare us,
Dr. Arnold told the interns.
Throwing us out there would be murder.
The SCP Foundation had to bring some previously classified technology out of storage in order to power a ship fast enough to cross the 1,500 light-years between Earth and Gaia BH1 within the time frame of a month. And Dr. Arnold found this overcommitment to the plot to destroy the Shy Guy to be shocking, as well as a sure sign that his superiors weren't joking around. Because of the overwhelming oppressive gravity of the black hole, there would have to be a significant distance between the Foundation space shuttle and the event horizon itself, or else the risk of all the staff being sucked in along with the leakers and SCP-096 would become too great. Instead, a portable version of SCP-096's containment chamber would be launched on a smaller rocket that would be guided via a pre-programmed route into the center of Gaia BH1. Dr. Arnold and the other leakers would be loaded onto the same rocket, which would boast no way for the unfortunate researchers to steer or redirect its course away from certain doom. Upon receiving confirmation that the ship was in range, the Mobile Task Force agents escorted the leakers on board the rocket with weapons pointed at them. They loaded the containment unit into the rocket next, taking care not to leave any chance of damaging the walls. Soon, everything was prepared for launch of the miniature rocket. Dr. Arnold, SCP-096, and the rest of the terminated staff would be launched away, never to return. But while this process was taking place, a deeply ill-timed event was occurring all the way back on Earth. A popular gaming streamer and content creator by the name of Bridget Parks was in the midst of her latest reaction stream when a member of the chat sent a link to a horror video for Parks to react to. The message was given priority because it had been sent as a super chat, a $100 super chat at that. What neither the SCP Foundation nor Bridget Parks knew was that the linked video was actually an archived copy of the viral video
that caused SCP-096 to wreak total havoc on the world. It appeared that in the shuffle of administering amnestics and using Foundation resources to scrub the internet clean of all instances of Dr. Arnold's accidentally leaked viral video, at least one copy of the file was lost in the shuffle and re-uploaded to a file hosting site from a private external hard drive days after the most recently reported attack of the Shy Guy. Whatever reason this anonymous fan chose to send this particular video into the stream will most likely remain a mystery, but what is known is that Bridget Parks would have to react to it, or risk devaluing the pull behind the super chat. Bridget was already deeply sleep-deprived, as those who work in her industry often are, and had been reacting to a wide variety of frightening and creepy short films over the past 3 hours. She was willing to do anything to keep the subathon going, and with some mild trepidation, Bridget Parks clicked the link to the video. In the moments that followed, the face of SCP-096 was viewed live on the internet by the entirety of Bridget Parks' current streaming audience, and without delay, this information became known to the Shy Guy. As both the chat and Bridget herself gawked and laughed at the creature, reacting with disgust and disbelief at its appearance, SCP-096 began to stir within its containment unit. It slammed its fists against the wall with sudden ferocity, startling Dr. Arnold and the other passengers aboard the rocket. The mobile task force, still safe inside the main shuttle, made preparations for launching the rocket into the black hole. "Any passing words, Dr. Arnold? We'll be recording them," said one of the agents present, snickering as his hand hovered over the launch button. In a panic, Dr. Arnold blurted, "Containment breach!" Every agent aboard the shuttle felt their hearts drop into their stomachs, because this was the one thing that the Foundation didn't want to happen. Truthfully, having allowed Arnold and the others squirm all the way to Gaia BH1 black hole had been deemed sufficient punishment for his transgression, and the plan up until this point had been to wait until the most pivotal moment to reveal to Arnold that he and his cohorts would be allowed to live and return to Earth. The fact that they would all be demoted to D-class personnel was beside the point, as mostly the Foundation didn't want to needlessly throw away lives that could be used to further scientific purposes. And yet, as Dr. Arnold screeched and carried on, the MTF agents made the swift and impulsive call to launch the rocket immediately. Regardless of the circumstances under which SCP-096's face had been viewed, there was zero chance that they would allow the thing to escape from its chamber before sending the rocket past the event horizon. Whatever the implications or ripple effects, the unplanned death of Dr. Arnold and the errant awareness of SCP-096 would have were questions for later. Now was the time for disposal. The mobile task force pressed the rocket launch button, sending the guided missile and its terrified occupants hurtling towards Gaia BH1. As the Shy Guy hammered away at the walls of its containment chamber, Dr. Arnold and the others faced away and prayed to whatever power would answer that the last moments of their fleeting lives wouldn't include being ripped apart by an enraged humanoid, while also being spaghettified by a black hole. Unfortunately, one of those two outcomes was inevitable. The rocket sailed right into the gravity well of Gaia BH1 and began to vanish from observable reality. Dr. Arnold and the others felt the indescribable sensation of being stretched into thin ribbons of matter by the force of gravity alone. SCP-096 began to undergo the same process inside the durable walls of its containment unit, though those same walls, as well as the entire rocket, were not durable enough to withstand being compressed. Back on Earth, the streaming audience of Bridget Parks was cracking a number of hurtful jokes at the expense of SCP-096, comparing it to popular creepypasta characters such as Slenderman. Bridget herself was facetiously calling members by their chat names and acting annoyed that such a video was even linked in the first place. None of them knew of the reckoning that might very well be coming for them, all from the depths of space. The members of the Foundation aboard the shuttle continued to observe Gaia BH1, even as the rocket had vanished beyond the event horizon, hoping that despite the unforeseen loss of personnel, the nightmare of another disastrous SCP-096 containment breach was over. What happened next made the very concept of known physics seem like an irrelevant joke. From inside the black hole, the spaghettified form of SCP-096 began to hold itself in place. The rest of the rocket and all of the researchers on board were not nearly as lucky, but then again, the effects that Gaia BH1 had on them was the expected result. What the Shy Guy was doing went beyond all estimation,
exerting a force of propulsion that was keeping pace with the unbelievable pressure of gravity of a black hole. Despite this, the Shy Guy was still stretched beyond recognition, a pale white line that seemed to go on forever into the vortex of Gaia BH1. Even in this abstract two-dimensional shape, the rage of SCP-096 at the ones who had seen its face was palpable. Its entire length began to shudder, pulsing with kinetic energy that had already surpassed almost anything in the known universe. To the outside observers who could only glimpse the impression left by the black hole, SCP-096 was already well and truly gone. But the longer the agents of the Mobile Task Force stared into the abyss, the more anxious they felt at the possibility of the Shy Guy somehow making it back from beyond the event horizon. And sure enough, like a nightmare that had spontaneously emerged into the daylight, the Foundation staff became able to see the tip of the spaghetti strand that was SCP-096. The Shy Guy had now partially stretched itself out of the grasp of the event horizon and back into observable reality. It was not yet in any recognizable shape, but the gradual appearance of a stretched-out version of its face did appear across the closer extreme of its distorted anatomy. It was almost like some kind of horrible worm with the face of a melting ghost, but how it looked was nothing compared to the implications of this form of SCP-096 being able to be seen again. Because if any piece of it had returned from the event horizon at all, and those observable pieces were starting to more closely resemble the Shy Guy's natural shape, this meant that the Shy Guy wasn't just pulling itself back with raw physical strength, it was increasing in velocity to such an extent that its body would soon be outrunning the force of gravity altogether.
Mother of God,
said head field researcher Newman.
096 is already faster than light.
The Foundation staff could do nothing but gaze in alarm as the Shy Guy's head returned to its normal shape. It was a comically surreal and horrible image, like a cartoon character from the rubber hose era of animation whose neck was stretching off screen. But any dark sense of humor derived from the appearance of the Shy Guy quickly vanished as the researchers realized all at once,
oh crap, we just looked at it too.
From the innermost depths of the void, a second strand of spaghetti matter separated from the main ribbon of SCP-096's form. Like string cheese, it rolled slowly to the surface of observed reality and formed an even more elongated limb of the Shy Guy. Like a colossal rope lasso, the arm dripped in and out of existence until a second super long arm joined it, and it became apparent what was happening. SCP-096 was thrashing against the gravitational pull of the black hole, swimming out of its seemingly inescapable current with two hideously distorted arms as paddles. It was as if someone had drawn SCP-096 with a pair of the same extending libs that Michael Jordan famously used to beat the Monstars in the basketball game in the classic animated live-action hybrid movie, Space Jam. The Shy Guy continued to swim forth, both arms windmilling at unfathomable speeds as it continued to break from the grasp of Gaia BH1. Now only its legs remained trapped on the other side of the event horizon, but at this rate, they wouldn't be for long. Every researcher aboard the shuttle dreaded the possibility, no, the dreadful eventuality, that 096 would snap itself free from the black hole's orbit and be unleashed upon the universe once again. And without a doubt, everyone aboard the shuttle would be the first victims of the Shy Guy. Though the exact order in which SCP-096 kills those who observe its face has been the subject of continued debate, the fact that Earth was 1,500 light-years away meant that any other potential targets were that far away too. There was no escaping the onslaught of SCP-096, and no way to redirect its anger to a new target.
He's picking up so much speed,
Mobile Task Force Agent Smith remarked. A horrible sound reverberated across space as SCP-096's legs zoomed to catch up with its body from the other side of the event horizon. In a truly unprecedented break from physics, the creature returned to its original shape, creating the mother of all sonic booms in the process. The sheer release of energy obliterated the shuttle, and any traces of space matter within the area around the black hole was also utterly obliterated. Like a murderous rubber band, SCP-096 blasted off from this point of elastic reunion, torpedoing across the vastness of the universe towards the Earth. The Shy Guy's target? None other than Bridget Parks and her entire active fanbase.
But this one ill-timed stream would have greater consequences than just the permanent cancellation of one formerly beloved content creator. It would mean the destruction of all life on the planet Earth. For you see, SCP-096 didn't possess the ability to deaccelerate its mass before impact with the blue and green sphere. And now, its entire faster-than-light form had been launched at the Earth from the inside of Gaia BH-1's event horizon, like a projectile from a railgun. It was over. The laughter, the Foundation, and civilization itself, all swept away in an instant as SCP-096 collided with the Earth in a truly unforgettable hull-dome maneuver. The blue planet exploded like a watermelon struck with a sledgehammer, and SCP-096 was pulverized into broken or tangled limbs. From there it sailed through space, slowly regenerating from its wounds as it passed farther and farther from the planet that once housed so many doomed onlookers. It was unknown how long the Shy Guy would survive out there, or where it would wind up next, but it was more than certain that no human would ever see its face again. Now go check out SCP-049 Cures SCP-096 of the Pestilence, Top 16 Insane SCP Tales, and SCP-096 Look at a Picture of Shy Guy in Space, The Shy Guy Questions and Theories for more.